Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. The necklace, per usual. It's down here if you want it. Before I start the story, if you don't follow my backup page, will you please go follow me now? Any income that I generate on that page is going towards a new car. If you've seen my truck videos, you understand why I'm trying to do that. Your girl needs a new car. Now on to the story. The girl from New York. I've experienced sleep paralysis 2 times in my life. The first time I was alone in my childhood bed, and it ended before I could see anything, thankfully. The second time I had the ironic misfortune to be in bed with my husband. Men, you know? My husband isn't a good sleeper. He tosses and turns, dreams vividly, talks a lot, and has jumped out of bed a handful of times because of his dreams. Wow, that would fucking suck. I say that because I have no idea if his sleep talking influences sleep paralysis or if I actually saw something. I like to believe he influenced me because the other option creeps me out way too much. I'm so sorry. I was picturing a man leaping out of bed. Now with that context, it's not that funny. Now with the context out of the way, I half woke up one night mid-conversation with my sleeping husband. We both sleep on our stomachs, and on this night we were facing each other. I was awake enough to know that we had been talking and that he was still asleep, but not awake enough to remember what we had been saying. A second or two later after I woke up, my husband asked, "Did you send the letter?" So I asked, "What letter?" "The letter to the girl." "What girl?" "The girl from New York." And for some reason, I responded with, "You mean the girl that's right here?" "What girl? Where?" To make it worse, even though I recognized what I was saying made no sense, we don't know anyone from New York, plus we live in Arkansas, so we're not even close to New York. And that this was probably just me dreaming, but my still half-asleep brain thought that it was funny. So I had to listen to myself and my husband giggle about our silly conversation. I guess since our conversation was basically over at that point, my body wanted to turn over and keep sleeping/dreaming. My head turned away from him to my side of the bed. Instead of just seeing the wall like I should have, I saw a pale pair of legs with a white A-line skirt on. Oh, no. Our bed was a little low at the time, so I could see that the skirt ended a couple inches below her knees, and I could guess that she was a little shorter than an average woman. Since I was still half asleep, I couldn't turn to look at her fully, and I could only see a little below her waist. I don't know if it was a full-on dress or a skirt, just that it was plain white and reminded me of a skirt from the 1940s. Her skin was stark white, yet she looked completely solid, like there was an actual person with literal white skin standing behind my bed. I don't know how or why, I just knew that this was supposed to be the girl from New York. Why isn't she in New York? Why is she there, though? She didn't move or make a sound, but it was still terrifying. Yeah, girl. I was trapped in my own body, staring at a person that didn't exist, with my husband blissfully unaware, less than a foot from me. Thankfully, the fear woke up my brain enough for logic to kick in. I convinced myself I could just turn over and look away and it would be okay. No. I'm not sure why, but since I couldn't close my eyes, I decided to start working on moving my pinky finger. I don't know how long it took, but I eventually got it to move, then my hand, then my arm. When I got my arm moving, I was actually able to push myself onto my side facing my husband, away from her. And turn your back on her? As soon as I was on my side, I was actually awake and I could move and close my eyes again. I was still terrified though, because if it wasn't just a dream, then I had just turned my back on a ghost or worse. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But then if it was, I might continue dreaming about her. I settled on just watching my husband sleep until I eventually fell back asleep myself. When we woke up in the morning, I asked him if he remembered it or had any dreams, and he said that he couldn't remember anything happening. I was spooked by it for a few days, but it never happened again. We never had anything else weird or spooky happen in that house either, so I've settled on it being my husband's fault for sleep talking and being a bad influence. If that's the case, though, who's the girl in New York? And why is your husband sleep talking about sending a letter to her? I have too much trauma because I absolutely would have made that an issue. Anyway, that would have sent me into a spiral, and I would have been looking all around the house to see if there was a letter addressed to somebody in New York at that point. Maybe that like a previous owner had. You know what I mean? Like that type of situation. Or maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. Anyway, what's your thoughts? Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I will see y'all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
This girl emailed me and said that something was mimicking her cousin while her cousin was sitting right next to her. So for the story, we're going to call this girl Ashley. So Ashley lives in the suburbs of Arizona on like the outskirts. Where she lived was more farmland than the rest of her town. She was basically surrounded by desert or farmland. She did have 2 neighbors that lived nearby, but to get to like the main part of their town, you would have to drive like 10 minutes. The majority of the drive being desert with an occasional house or 2. So on this particular night, her and her 2 older cousins, which we're going to call Daisy and Lily, were home alone because their parents were at a wedding. So they decided that they're going to invite their friend Lacey over because they don't want the house to feel so ominous and empty. It's important to note that the house was relatively big and it had a lot of huge open windows. She did say that her and her cousins were like siblings, and she called it ominous because she'd had experiences there before with her cousins. On this night, it's about 10 p.m. They're all sitting on the couch, they're watching a show, and they're just chatting. When suddenly Lacey zones out a little bit, and she's just kind of staring at this sliding glass door that leads to the backyard. So she's just staring randomly outside for no reason, when all of a sudden she just snaps her head over at Ashley and Lily. She then just stands up. She starts walking over to the sliding glass door, and she's attempting to like look outside. And Lily and Ashley are kind of like, what are you doing? And then it's just kind of like, I swear when I was just sitting down, I saw Lily speed walking past the sliding glass door. At this point, they all think that she's just messing with them. So they all laugh it off, and they're like, just come back, come sit on the couch. So at this point, Lacey is scared. She tries to laugh it off too, because she doesn't know how else to handle it. But as they're all sitting on the couch, Lily and Ashley start to notice that Lacey looks genuinely freaked out. So about an hour goes by, and they're all sitting on the couch. They're still watching TV, and they're chatting, when suddenly they hear a voice coming from the other room. And it says, Ashley, come here real quick and help me. Except for there's a problem with this. It's in Ashley's brother's voice. And her brother is not there. He's at college, away. So they all stop, and they're just sitting there staring at each other. They are horrified at this point. And Ashley's about to say something when suddenly, Ashley, in her brother's voice again. So at this point, Lacey stands up and she's about to say something when Lily and Ashley just hit her to stop. They don't want her to say anything. So they're all just standing there in fear, frozen, and minutes go by with just silence. After a few minutes of them just standing there, their way of kind of coping with this is they're like, you know what? We're just exhausted. We're tired. We're hearing things. It's fine. And we're just going to enjoy the rest of the night. And we're going to ignore this. We're going to pretend like it didn't happen. Well, a couple minutes later, Ashley's mom texts her and she says, I'm going to be home in about an hour or so. They're like, okay, bet. We're tired. We're going to go to sleep now. So they all decide that they're going to lay on the couch together, and they all start kind of drifting off to sleep. As they're all laying there, Ashley sees something outside of the window again. She sees like this shadowy figure right outside of the glass door. And she looks over at Lacey, and Lacey sees it too. And then they hear something that makes their heart stop, because they hear this pattering sound, like something with wet feet is like running on tile. And they both look at each other, and they both realize that it could not be coming from outside, because those doors that lead to outside, that glass is soundproof. So now something is inside of the house running around with wet feet. So they wake up Lacey, and they're like, Lacey, something with wet feet is running around the house. And at this point, Lacey is like, we need to get out of the house. There could be an intruder in the house. So they all go they quietly and slowly go grab their phones and their jackets and their shoes. And they decide that they're going to go to a fast food place until their mom gets home. And as they're walking to the front door, which you have to cross the hallway to get there, they see large, wet, bare footprints across the tile. So they book it out of there. Now, she said that after this incident, her whole house has just not felt the same at all whatsoever. And that now her stepdad and her mom are both having experiences themselves. Things such as like hearing sprinting down the hallway at night, or something breathing down their neck. And now they're about to call a priest because they don't know what else to do. So what did you guys think of this story?
What would you do if you became friends with a girl who was obsessed with you and then slowly realized that she didn't just admire you, she wanted to become you? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who said that a friend didn't just admire her life, she wanted to take her place in it. This happened when I was 23 and had just moved to a new city for work. I didn't know many people yet, so when I had met this girl through a coworker and she seemed nice, I was glad to have somebody to hang out with. Her name was Lila, and at first she just seemed quiet, a little intense maybe, but not in a scary way. She paid attention when I talked, and she remembered little things. I thought she was just one of those people who really listen. Then she started copying me. It was small at first. She bought the same jacket I had, then started doing her makeup the same way. Then she changed her hair so it looked more like mine. And I noticed it, but I didn't want to be weird about it. Friends influence each other. That happens. Then she started using my phrases, not common ones either, specific stuff I said all the time without realizing it. The exact same wording, the same tone, little expressions I'd had forever. And one of my coworkers joked once that Lila was turning into me. Lila smiled at that in a way that I didn't like. After that, she got more personal. She always wanted to borrow something, a shirt, a ring, a scarf, perfume, a hair clip. It was constant. If I said no, she'd act embarrassed and back off for a moment and then ask for something else later. Then I started noticing things missing. Nothing big enough to make a huge deal over. Maybe it was a lipstick or just one earring or a shirt I hadn't worn in a while or just little things around my apartment. I thought I was just being careless. The first time I got really uncomfortable was because of my hairbrush. I'd cleaned hair out of it the night before and then accidentally left a little pile on the bathroom counter before throwing it away. And I remembered that. But the next morning, it was gone. That same week, I was at Lila's apartment and saw a shallow dish on the windowsill with hair twisted into little loops inside it. My hair is dyed a dark shade of red, and hers was light brown then. So I definitely knew what I was looking at. I asked what it was, and she slid the dish behind a plant and laughed it off. After that, I started noticing more things in her apartment. Bowls of water in corners with what looked like bones in them. Multiple burned candles, even in the daytime. I even saw my photo cut out of a group picture and tucked into the edge of her mirror. But she always had some excuse. Then one night I stayed over because we'd both been drinking a little and it felt easier than getting home. I woke up in the middle of the night and she wasn't in the room. I heard whispering from the bathroom and got up to look. The door was cracked open, and Lila was sitting on the floor in front of the mirror wearing one of my shirts. There were candles around her and things spread out on the floor between them, jewelry, papers, photos, little knickknacks, and I couldn't see everything. Then she said my name, not to me, to the mirror, over and over. I backed away and went straight back to bed. I didn't say anything in the morning because I still wanted some normal explanation. Then she started showing up in places I hadn't told her I'd be. Coffee shops near work, bar with coworkers, laundromat near my building. She always acted surprised to see me. It got to where I'd see her name on my phone and not want to answer. Then one weekend, I went out of town to see my parents. When I got back, my apartment felt off immediately. That sounds vague, I know, but that's exactly how it felt. Like somebody had been in there. Nothing obvious was gone. But then I opened my closet and realized my black dress was missing. I had brought it towards the front so I could wear it this weekend when I went out. It's always my go-to for a night out. I texted Lila and asked if she had taken it. She left me on read for almost an hour and then texted back, "If I had your dress, I bet I would look exactly like you." That was the moment it stopped feeling a little weird and started feeling very creepy. I blocked her after that, and a few days later, one of my coworkers asked if I had been at a wine bar across the town the night before. I said no, and she said she could have sworn she saw me there in a black dress heading to the bathroom. I didn't tell her anything. And that same week, I came home and found an old college photo taped to my apartment door. Everyone else had been cut out of it except me. On the back, in her writing, it said, "You leave too much of yourself lying around." I got my locks changed after that. And the last time I saw her was in my apartment. I came home one night and my bedroom light was on. I knew I had left it off. I heard movement in there and called 911 before I even stepped inside. Then I walked down the hall and looked in. The bathroom door was cracked open. Lila was sitting on the floor in front of the mirror wearing one of my shirts. There were candles around her and my things spread out between them. My ring and my hair tied with red thread. She kept saying my name under her breath while staring into the mirror. I don't know what made me stay there watching. I should have walked away immediately. But then my foot shifted against the floor and made the smallest sound. Lila turned her head towards the door, but her reflection didn't. Her reflection stayed facing ahead, looking directly at me through the mirror, and it was smiling. Not a normal sweet smile, it was too wide and not moving. It was the most sinister smile I've ever seen, like it had been waiting for me to finally see it. Lila's actual face wasn't smiling at all when she looked at me. She just tilted her head a little and said very calmly, "I'm almost there." I backed away and waited for police outside. By the time they searched the apartment building, she was gone. I got a restraining order eventually. I moved and I changed jobs, and I don't know where she is now. For months after that, people would stop me and say they thought they had just seen me somewhere else. Maybe it was her. I still don't let people borrow my clothes now, and I don't leave hair sitting in a brush. And if somebody starts copying little things too fast, I pay attention. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
So this happened in Colombia when this girl was 11 years old. She is now 25 years old. It was Halloween night and she had gone with her mom and her mom's boyfriend to the center of the plaza where they lived. It was a small town and they would give out candy to all the kids. She explains that the entire time that they were giving out candy, she remembers that her mom's boyfriend kept saying different scary stories that had to do with witches. Apparently in the area, it is really well known for having witches, and he had a few stories that he had encountered himself. But there was one specific story that he told that happened to him on Halloween night when he was a kid. Beyond trying to scare her, she was actually more curious because the story that he said was about how you can summon a witch. Apparently, you have to use the energy that comes with Halloween night, and you had to doubt their existence. While doing all of that, you had to also say a very simple mantra. Bitch, I don't want to say it, and I want to put it on the screen, but once you listen to the rest of the story, you're also not going to want to say it in your head. So it's like, if I put it here, you're going to read it in your mind, so like, should I read it? Or is this a warning for you to close your fucking eyes until you hear me talking again? I don't know. Listen, I may love scary stories, but I don't fuck with shit like this, okay? So let me think about what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put it on the screen. If you want to close your eyes, go ahead and do so, and I will tell you to open them once it's away from the screen. Okay, ready, go. Okay, it's gone. It's gone. So that same night, because she was so fucking curious, like, if this would work, obviously it's Halloween night. That was the only night that she had a chance to do so. She was determined to do this. She was gonna use the energy of that night. She was gonna doubt the existence, and she was gonna say this mantra. So she turned the lights off in her bedroom. She sat on her bed, and she continued to say this mantra over and over again with the feeling of, you know, doubting them and everything. It's Halloween night. Now, she went as far as to lay down because she was getting tired, and then she kept saying the mantra over and over again in her head as well. She says that she felt excited for a little bit, and she just was like, what's gonna happen? Like, is something gonna appear, something not? But she ended up going to sleep either way. The fuck? I wouldn't have been asleep, but first of all, I wouldn't have done it, okay? And I know that I'm showing you the mantra, but I'm doing it at your own risk. I'm telling you to close your eyes and then come back when I speak. So please do not blame me. If you fucking do this, it's at your own risk. I love you and I care about you, and that's why I'm just like, close your eyes. But also, I wouldn't fucking share the story because it's scary and I like it. I'm no better than this girl because I feel like young Letty would have done something stupid like that. Like the amount of times I played with Ouija boards back in the day, yeah, fuck. So she believes it's like 3 or 4 in the morning when she hears a big like thud, and it makes her wake up. But it sounded like if something really heavy landed on her dresser that is right next to her bed. And obviously she is scared, and she is like, okay, well, I'm gonna open my eyes and I want to see what the hell is on the dresser. And she explains how it took her a little bit for her eyes to adjust to the darkness in the room. She can see that it was a figure on top of her dresser, and it looked to be a woman because she could see that it had hair. However, she could tell that this woman had her back faced to her. She could see all the hair in the back. Oh, Lord. In that moment, she closed her eyes and she started praying, but she said that the vibe in the room was just so heavy and so dark that she decided to turn on her belly and try to go to sleep. Like, she just wanted to go back to sleep and not see whatever the hell was next to her. This is where she experienced the ugliest thing that she had ever experienced in her life. Moments after she turned to her belly and was trying to fall asleep, she felt an arm grab her by the shoulder, turn her back around. So now she's like looking up. She tried to scream the second that she saw this person's lady's face because apparently it was nasty, it was bad, it was just ugly, but nothing would come out. Like, she would try to scream and there was nothing coming out of her mouth. She explains how now this thing grabbed her by the throat really hard, but she was more scared of what she looked like. That lady like tightening her arm around her neck, it didn't hurt. She was more scared at what she was literally seeing on top of her. By this point, while the lady is like choking her, she's literally floating above her bed. She's not by the dresser anymore. And she just says that she would try to say like, please stop, please, like I don't want this, please, please. Then out of nowhere, in the blink of an eye, this lady just disappeared. And she is thinking to herself, I just had the worst fucking nightmare that I've ever had in my life. Obviously, she could not go back to sleep. It was still dark outside, and she said that she laid in her bed until she saw like the rays of sunshine coming into her bedroom. When she got up, she looked at her dresser, and when she saw it, she saw that there was an indentation there at the exact spot where she had seen this lady with her back facing her. And that's the moment she realized that she indeed did not have a fucking nightmare. This was real, and it wasn't like the scary nightmare that she thought she was having. She knew in that moment that what she did was wrong, and what she had summoned was very fucking real.
I witnessed a possession and exorcism in Romania, and it was the scariest thing that I've ever seen. And not only that, but it made me believe in the battle between good and evil. This Spooky Scary Storytime submission came from someone who wanted to be called A, who says she's a 42-year-old Romanian woman. She's a mother, she's an animal lover, and she's an Orthodox Christian. And she knows that most people know of vampires as the supernatural force that Romania is known for. And she could tell me a lot of stories about that, as well as the witchcraft that's practiced in her region and the energetic triangle that forms a portal in their mountains. But she wants to focus on this story because she actually witnessed it firsthand. He says that exorcisms are not officially recognized by the church in Romania. However, there's two different types of priests, and they practice these behind closed doors. The first kind of priests are known as fathers, and they are the Orthodox priests. They are allowed to serve in the church if they're married. And then there's the monks who live in monasteries. And the monks are thought to be more pure or more powerful because they abstain from relationships and are thus not married. They fast for long periods at a time, and they pray all day. And their entire lives exist within these monasteries. The thought of them being more powerful comes from the idea that abstaining from relationships allows them to magnify their life force, maintain a high vibration, and unlock inner powers that most people would never be able to obtain. All of this said, there are certain times of the year and certain services within the church where the fathers and the monks come together along with the congregation, especially holy days. And that's actually when her story takes place. It was the night of December 31st, and she was going through a particularly rough time. And so she decided to go to a service at a monastery that she had heard really good things about. She heard it was really beautiful. Apparently there is a portrait of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. And it's thought that if you kiss this painting, the Virgin Mary will bestow luck upon you, and she'll listen to your wants, and she will bless you with all of your wishes coming true. And there's even stories locally from where A lives that certain women have gone to see this painting and seen her crying, and then they all rush to collect her tears on a handkerchief. Where this painting is housed is just a gorgeous monastery in general. And so A wanted to go because the night between December 31st and January 1st is known as Holy. The skies open up and the Holy Spirit comes down to bless all the people in the congregation. And at this service, which starts at 11 p.m., the priests and the monks come together to serve and chant and pray with the people. And so she said going to this service, she felt completely at peace. It was actually impossible not to cry. But when midnight came, something happened. All of a sudden, everyone around her stopped singing, stopped praying, stopped chanting, and the doors to the monastery opened, and in walked 4 grown men carrying a little girl who was probably no more than 10 years old by the arms. When they entered the building, some people made the sign of the cross, some started whispering to each other, and others moved aside as if this was a normal occurrence. And A had no idea what was going on. At first, she thought the little girl may have had physical disabilities because the grown men were carrying her by the arms up down the center aisle toward the priest. But the little girl didn't seem right. She didn't seem with it. Her feet dragged behind her as if her shoes were filled with heavy stones, and her eyes weren't registering. It was like she didn't know where she was. And the priest stood before the congregation, holding a cross in front of him. When they reached the priest, they stopped walking, and the priest splashed her face with holy water 3 times. And he said, "You are in the house of our Lord." And A says this little girl let out the loudest, most painful scream she's ever heard. She said, "I jumped back because it didn't seem human. And then I realized that they believed this little girl was possessed and that they were going to perform an exorcism." As soon as the little girl stopped screaming, she brushed the 4 grown men aside as if they were leaves in the wind. was like she had superhuman strength. A could not believe what she was seeing. And then she took a step toward the priest, who stood unmoving, still with the cross in front of him. The priest started chanting an old prayer, and the girl's face became ugly and contorted and scary. She said she could see from where she was sitting that there was no life behind her eyes, but then she started cursing the priest. The priest continued splashing her with holy water, and she began to vomit, but it wasn't normal. It was metal nails, it was pieces of glass, it was rocks. She said she began to scream at the priest in different languages, and then it sounded like there were 100 different voices coming out of her mouth. She was staring at the priest with such a hate that he says it didn't even look like a human was in there. And she says she felt a cold draft settle on her, and then she felt this immense sadness that she can only attribute to losing someone that you love deeply. She said, I think I was feeling sad for the little girl, but weirdly I also felt sad for whatever was inside her being tortured, because you could feel it. I said at this point, she could not believe what she was seeing. She did not want to be there. She didn't know what she had signed up for, but she was too afraid to leave. The priest yelled at the little girl. He said, tell us your name in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the little girl did not reply. He repeated it 2 more times, and finally she spoke. Within seconds, different voices started spilling out of her mouth. There was a crying baby voice. There was moaning. There was what sounded like a wild animal. And each time she spoke, it sounded like 10 other voices were layered onto the original sound. And she started threatening the priest, and she said, they're waiting for you on the other side. A says the priest was unmoved. He did not engage, and he kept screaming at her to tell us your name, demon, in the name of everything holy. I command you to tell us your name. She says just when she thought this little girl's screams couldn't get any worse, she started crying, and she began to levitate. A could not believe her eyes. She levitated, she made the sign of a cross, and then she said, we are thrones, we are legions, in what sounded like 100 different voices at once. She began to name biblical names that went on for at least 5 to 10 minutes. As she did, she cried. When she had named the last name, she fell to the floor. The priest placed the cross on her forehead, and she fainted. The priest said, Jesus, take the sheep back into your arms again, and he motioned for some men to come and take the girl out of the building. After they removed her, he went back to praying and singing and chanting with the rest of the congregation, who all acted like nothing strange or out of the ordinary had happened. She says that she knows that many people will believe that what she saw was staged, but she sees no point in staging anything, because after witnessing it herself, she knows that what she saw was real, and she believes that no matter what you believe or who you believe in, that experience showed her that greater forces exist, and the battle between good and evil is very real. After witnessing this and leaving the monastery that night, she says she talked to some other people and recounted what she saw. And they actually told her that these exorcisms are pretty common and that anyone can attend one. You just have to know where to look and what services to go to. But certain services and certain nights are considered to be more powerful because the veil between the heavens and the earth gets thinner and the light of God can come through easier. She says ultimately she believes she was supposed to be there that day to witness what she did, because it showed her something that she needed to know going through the time that she was, which was that she wasn't alone and that God was with her. They did send one other story about when she kissed that painting that I mentioned earlier and what happened after. Essentially, it cured her mother from cancer, and she says, I don't care what people believe. I know that that happened for me and that what I experienced was real. And she says she'll make time to tell me the other stories about her region and Romania in general. In the meantime, she says that she truly appreciates this community, and it warms her heart reading the comments of some of the other videos and how people come together about this subject. If you have a spooky, scary story time that you think nobody would believe, especially if it's from a different culture or it's a generational story, send it in. We'd love to hear it.
My husband sees scary things at night. I've been with my husband for almost 14 years, and pretty much our whole relationship, he has always had sleep paralysis. He has always seen very scary things, has nightmares, you name it. Spooky story time while I get ready for bed. When my husband and I were dating, I remember clearly the very first time that I experienced this with him. We were taking a nap. It was on a Sunday. The football game was playing in the background. And I remember it clearly. He was like freaking out. He was like shaking and like doing this kind of thing on the bed. So obviously I wake up and I'm trying to wake him up, and I'm like, okay, what happened? What's going on? And at first he wouldn't tell me right away. He wasn't telling me that he was having like sleep paralysis or that he was seeing anything crazy. And I remember one of the very first times that he actually sat down and explained it to me. He says that we were both asleep and he felt something tugging on the blanket. Now, this was in the middle of winter. Again, we're watching football. So he says that he feels like something is tugging on the blanket, and he kind of like, he's laying down, he picks his head up and he sees tons of snakes crawling all over him and I. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm scared of snakes. Even if I'm not like literally terrified of snakes, I'm pretty sure if I saw one crawling on me, I would freak out. Another incident, we again were laying down taking a nap, and he says that he kind of hears like a creaking, like a door creak. So he kind of again turns around, looks, picks his head up, and he literally sees his closet door go from this, and he hears like it's slowly opening. And I'm not even gonna lie, I swear, I witnessed this myself while I was awake. So I don't know if maybe his childhood home is haunted, but this is continued now as grown-ass adults. Now this one is a recent one. He told me literally this happened last night. We have a futon in the garage and we have new puppies. So he has the puppies on the mama dog and they are of course feeding, they're eating, and he ends up falling asleep on our futon. I did go in there, I did check on him, but I saw that he was asleep. So I'm not gonna wake this man up. He's exhausted, he is tired. So I was like, at some point he's gonna wake up and he's gonna realize he's not in bed and he'll just come upstairs with me. That's not what happened. This morning I am up, I am awake, I am getting ready for work, and he tells me that he had another nightmare, but he swears he was awake. He says that he was laying down on the futon, he was asleep, and he literally feels the futon shaking, like violently shaking from underneath him. Of course he wakes up, right? Obviously. I don't know about you, but I'd be scared. So he wakes up and he's like, okay, what's going on? Is Jasmine, me, playing a trick on me? Like, is she messing around? And he looks around and obviously I'm not there. Baby, I am gone. I am asleep. So he's like, I'm having a dream. Everything's fine. He lays back and he's not asleep. Like, he's awake. He has his phone in his hand and he says that he feels the futon shaking from underneath him again. I have cleansed the house. I have staged the house. I have done all of the things that you can imagine. Do you think that he is imagining these things, or do you think this shit is for real? Personally, I think it's for real. Sleep paralysis is no joke. The stories that he's told me, the things that he has seen, no thank you. I am very intrigued by sleep paralysis stories. So if you guys have one that you'd like for me to read, please send it via DM or email because I'd love to read them. And let me know what you guys think. I'd love to have some feedback because this is bizarre. I personally do not suffer from sleep paralysis, but let me know what you guys think.
Were these people abducted by aliens? Not my story, but my father-in-law swears he was abducted on a camping trip in the northern Appalachians with about 4 other people. They hiked up near a lake and set up a campsite and set up camp. He says they all remember swimming, then eating dinner, but no one remembers cleaning up camp or going into their tents. They woke up about 10 yards away from their original site in the exact formation that they had set up the camp. But all of the little stuff was in the same spot, and there was a fire in the middle of the original area, but not in the new one. They pulled out a measuring tape my father-in-law had in his backpack from work and measured the distance between the stakes of the tent poles. And it was the exact distance between all of the tent poles from where they originally were in the new area. And before anyone says anything, my father-in-law is a super light sleeper and doesn't drink or do anything else, has no history or symptoms of mental illness, and was the first one awake. He still refuses to go hiking on that trail to this day. It's an easy hike, so he isn't just trying to be lazy and get out of it either. I was out in the woods on a summer day, running for a good hour or so, when suddenly I didn't remember where I was or who I was, only that I was free. I couldn't remember where I was going, the house I lived in, my siblings, my parents, nothing. But somehow that feeling was completely liberating, like nothing in the world mattered. I actually started walking into the woods because I figured I'd need to make a hut out of sticks to sleep in for the night, considering I was clearly traveling somewhere on foot and nowhere near home. After 5 minutes of collecting sticks, my memory started coming back, and I realized that my house was only 20 minutes away. When I got back to the house, the timer on my watch that I had started before the run said 4 hours. It should have only been 2, max. Lost time always makes me think of aliens. I believe I've been abducted multiple times, probably about once every 2 or 3 years since I was 8. I have been examined, but nothing invasive was ever done, and the extraterrestrials seemed genuinely curious about humans. More often, it is just an interview via telepathy about how I am feeling and how things are going. The last abduction was about 6 months ago. I remember waking up, seeing figures through my bedroom window make their way into my home, never waking my girlfriend or dogs, and leading me out to their craft. One even seemed fascinated with one of my dogs, but I sort of thought of how angry and hurt I would be if anything happened to that dog, and he backed away. I remember when I was 9, I was paralyzed in my bed. All of a sudden, this blue light shines through the bedroom window. I see my covers fall off to the floor as I get lifted through the window. I remember bits and pieces of being on a table in a room as other children are being examined too. There was a tall creature that looked like a praying mantis in a robe over me that put these needles in my legs. It didn't hurt, and it was talking to me telepathically about the procedure, helping me walk. During that time, I had issues with my legs and had a difficult time walking. I black out and wake back up in my bed, minus the covers that were now on the floor. I had 3 needle marks on each leg where I remember the creature putting them. Ever since, I've been able to walk a lot better and have had no more problems. That is so nice. This freaked me out for a couple of weeks. It was so real that I found myself Googling alien abductions for days after. I struggled to get to sleep and had to take a little NyQuil just to settle myself. Anyway, here's the best I can remember from 5 years ago. I was sitting in something like a small movie theater with the lights on. There were a few other people in there with me, maybe about 10 of us. I was strapped into my chair, strap across my waist and one across my chest. All of a sudden, my chair lifted up to the roof and tilted so I was facing the floor. The strap across my waist was tight and lifted my top slightly, revealing my belly. I felt self-conscious that my belly fat was on show and moved my arm to adjust my top. Then the chair moved to my left at a high speed into a dark space. Next thing I know, I am in my bed at home lying on my front, which I never do, and on top of the blankets. I remained still as I woke up and was trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I lay there listening for a while and could hear some scuffling. After a few minutes, I moved my foot a few inches to feel for my cat. He didn't wake up, which was not like him. I then heard a clear, quiet voice say, "She is waking up." I froze, with my heart beating at a crazy rate. I lay there for 3 hours, scared, too scared to move or switch the light on. My husband and cat peacefully slept while I was traumatized by the whole experience. Even when daylight came and I was up and about, I was still in fear. I told my husband and he just laughed. I never had a dream like that before or one since. Let us know in the comments if you have ever been abducted by aliens or if you've ever seen like a UFO or something.
My best friend ended up doing brujeria on me, and this is how I found out. Everything started my freshman year of high school. Me and my best friend Melissa were extremely close. Around that time, I also happened to be involved in a relationship that was great, as far as I knew, but that relationship ended abruptly with absolutely no warning. After that relationship ended, me and Melissa got even closer because she was almost like a shoulder for me to cry on, type of thing. Not to mention, we also went to Bible study together, so without fail, I would always see her every Wednesday at Bible study. At first, I only saw her as a friend, but out of nowhere one day, that completely changed. I started having feelings for her, and I began to find her extremely attractive. I also noticed that my mood started to depend on whether or not I was around her. I also noticed that anytime I would start talking to someone new, the moment Melissa would find out about it, that talking stage would immediately end. Eventually, Melissa and I ended up getting in a relationship together, and I have never experienced anything like it. It was like a magnetic pull drew me to her, like I couldn't get enough of her. After about 7 months, she ended up cheating on me with a guy. I ended up having to end the relationship even though every part of me did not want to end it. Like I still wanted to stay with her. I felt like I was emotionally attached. She ended up getting into a full-blown relationship with the guy she cheated on me with. About a year later, her and that guy that she cheated on me with ended up breaking up, and she tried to come back into my life. At first, I allowed her back into my life as an acquaintance, but no matter what or how I tried to deny it, that connection that I had with her was still there. One day after we were hanging out, she told me that she had something to confess to me, but that she was afraid to do so because if she did, or if I found out about it, it would have serious consequences. I reassured her that there was nothing that she could tell me that I would get mad about, that she could go ahead and tell me what she needed to say. That's when she admitted that while her and I were just friends, she performed a love spell on me. She said that she collected my hair while we were sitting in Bible study class. I happened to sit right in front of her. She had used a spell that she had purchased from a flea market. She said that the reason why she hadn't told me before is because if I knew about it, it wouldn't work, or it wouldn't have the same effect that it would if I was completely like in the dark about the whole thing. After this confession, the emotional attachment that I had for Melissa completely disappeared, and I cut contact with her. She did attempt to reach out a few months later, but I did not respond. But essentially, once a person comes clean that they're doing love spells or any sort of spells on you, it's supposed to break that curse or attachment. Since all of this, I heard that her life has not gone well, and I personally feel that things shifted for her after she confessed what she had done to me. Thank you for reading, and I would love to stay anonymous. So, what do you guys think on the situation? Like I always say, love spells, you don't want someone that you have to do love spells on. You want someone who genuinely loves you the natural way. That's what you want in your life. Love spells, that's temporary. They're going to end up resenting you and hating you in the end. You cannot control someone's free will.
A ghost at Pompeii made eye contact with me before screaming. Lip gloss on so I can run this mouth. Now let me focus. Scary story time, Fright Night Files. I'm a 34-year-old woman from Ohio who stayed for 2 years to take a solo trip to Italy. I was just a tourist when I went to Pompeii. I just wanted to see it. Last September, I'd taken the train from Naples in the morning and spent most of the day walking the site. If you've never been, Pompeii is massive, way bigger than most people expect. I had maybe 45 minutes left, and I was making my way towards the exit when I passed the Garden of Fugitives. If you don't know what the Garden of Fugitives is, let me explain it because the context matters enormously. It's a real place inside the Pompeii archaeological site, a restored vineyard garden near the Porta Nocera, I'm probably saying that incorrectly, sorry, gate in the southeastern part of the site. In 1961, archaeologists discovered 13 people there who had died together during the eruption in 79 AD, adults, teenagers, and children, including an infant. They'd apparently run to the garden seeking shelter when Vesuvius erupted, and they didn't make it. The plaster of all 13 of them are still there, still in their original positions. It's really sad. They're kept in a glass enclosed shed within the garden itself to protect them from the elements. So most tourists walk past it fairly quickly. It's uncomfortable to look at, as I can imagine. 13 people frozen in the positions of their deaths, clenched hands, curled bodies, a mother near her children. Very sad. That detail tends to end conversations. By the time I got there, most of the other tourists had already moved towards the exit. I was one of the only people who actually paused at the garden. I stood at the viewing area outside the glass enclosure for a few minutes, and that's when I noticed the smell. I want to be careful describing this because I know how easy it is to sound like you're exaggerating. It wasn't a bad smell exactly. It was an earthy mineral, like fresh turned soil mixed with something sharper underneath, something I couldn't name. I assumed at first it was just the site itself, volcanic soil, ancient stone, whatever combination of things that makes Pompeii smell the way it does in certain spots. It was coming from one direction. And then I noticed the temperature had dropped, not gradually, noticeably suddenly, the way it drops when you step into a cold room, except I was standing outside in the open air on a warm September evening. To my left, maybe 10 feet away, standing just outside the rope barrier that runs along the edge of the garden path, was a woman. She was wearing a long dress, dark, heavy-looking fabric, completely wrong for a warm September afternoon. No bag, no phone, no sunglasses, nothing any tourist at an outdoor site in southern Italy in that heat would have on them. She was just standing there with her hands at her sides looking at the enclosure. I almost said something to her, just like some small talk or whatever you make with strangers at places like this, but something stopped me before I opened my mouth. I looked at her more carefully, and that's when I noticed she wasn't blinking. I know how that sounds. It sounds like some kind of detail I would add to make the story scary, but I watched her for what I would estimate was a full 30 seconds. She did not blink once. She was totally still in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up before my brain had even caught up with why. turned her head away from the enclosure and looked directly at me. We maintained eye contact for about 15 seconds before she looked away at Mount Vesuvius. Looked at it the way that you look at something you recognize, the way you look at something you have a history with recognition. She stared at it for what felt like a very long time, but it was probably about 20 seconds, and then she screamed. Not a startled scream, not a scared scream, something older and more desperate than either of those things. The kind of sound that doesn't seem like it should be able to come from a human throat, raw and ancient and absolutely full of terror that had no bottom to it. It went through me like a current. I put both my hands over my ears. My whole body responded before my mind did, and every muscle locked. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there frozen while that sound tore through the late afternoon quiet of the garden. She threw her arms up over her face, both of them crossed over her head, elbows out, the exact position you'd throw your arms up if something was coming down on top of you, the exact position of someone shielding themselves from something falling from the sky. And then, I don't have a clean way to describe what happened next, so I'm just going to tell you what I saw. It started at her feet. The fabric of her dress at the hem just stopped being there. Not like she disappeared, not like she faded. It was like watching something be consumed from the bottom up slowly, the way the edge of a piece of paper curls and blackens when it gets close to a flame. Except there was no flame, there was no smoke, there was no sound except for the scream, which had already ended, leaving a silence that was somehow louder than the scream had been. Her ankles, her legs, her waist, all of it just ceasing to exist inch by inch from the ground up, like whatever she was made of was being reclaimed by something underneath her, being like pulled back down into the earth that had held her for almost 2,000 years. Her arms were still raised over her head when the last of her disappeared. And then there was nothing. The path was empty. The garden was silent. The late afternoon light was still gold and long and beautiful and completely indifferent of what I had just watched happen 10 feet away from me. I don't know how long I stood there before I could make myself move. I know that by the time I got to the exit, my legs were shaking badly enough that one of the site staff asked me if I was all right. I told him I was fine. They died shielding their faces. They died exactly the way that woman looked when she disappeared. I think she's been reliving it for 2,000 years. And I think the only reason she stopped long enough to stand there and look through that glass is because somebody finally stopped long enough to actually see her. I don't know. I've been reading it to you, and it's just so sad and tragic what happened to all of the people of Pompeii. And has anyone else experienced a ghost of Pompeii? And why don't you hear more experiences about them? They died tragically. Clearly there are ghosts there, and I don't know why I'd never even considered it before.
This is by far the most confrontational paranormal story I have ever received. I would have passed out. One of my followers, his name is Miles, sent this story in to me. Miles wrote this story so well that I'm actually going to read it word for word. All right, buckle up and stay till the end. He starts out by saying, some context for clarity. The campus in which I used to work is the Old Massillon State Hospital. This hospital was, for lack of a better term, the insane asylum. The agency owned 3 of the old buildings, 2 are occupied, and 1 is abandoned. The abandoned building is McKinley Hall. The entire campus is private property, and trespassers were a big problem. I was not a security guard, I was just a regular employee. On to the story. One night, I noticed a rustling near the abandoned building while I was doing a grounds check. I called my coworker on the radio to tell him what I saw, and he agreed to come with me. I grabbed my flashlight and we walk over to the building. It's around 10 p.m., so it's dark, and there aren't any lights around the corner of the property. We figured that someone probably broke into McKinley Hall again. It certainly wouldn't be the first time, nor would it be the last. The police should have been called, but the manager always sent us hourly people. Anyways, we walked carefully through the now oppressive darkness and approached the building from the sidewalk leading to the front doors from the road. We were sure one of the doors had been forced open, and sure enough, it looked like it had been. It was normally secured with a chain and padlock, but right now it was nowhere to be seen, with no visible clues as to where they were. It was like they simply vanished from around the handles. Against our better judgment, we walked into the front lobby and looked around. You've probably seen something similar in a horror movie. Peeling paint, dusty floors, rotting wood, and what was probably mold floating in the still air. It was uncomfortable at best, sickening at worst. All we had was a flashlight, and while it was bright, We couldn't see footprints anywhere. Despite the lack of footprints, we could hear someone walking around. And unfortunately, this meant that we had to continue our search. We started in the basement, and it looked like you'd expect it to. Piles of old metal furniture, more peeling paint, and holes in the walls. And more than enough spider webs. Much of it looked like it was thrown around in rage. Things were bent and snapped, and some embedded into the walls. We quickly moved through the auditorium, which was on the opposite side of the basement from which we entered. The auditorium was littered with mangled chairs and a single chair set in the middle of the stage. I could feel eyes on me as we walked by. I said as much to my coworker, and we hurried up the stairs. The first floor was very much the same, moldering and rusty with plenty of abandoned furniture, holy walls and broken doors. It had that same heavy, disquieting feeling as the basement. No people, thankfully. There wasn't much of note, so nothing really stands out to share. The second floor was worse. Broken windows were letting the wind in, but the air wasn't fresh. It smelled like mildew and mold, with a taste of decay that coated our noses, and was almost thick enough to touch. If you've experienced it, you know what I mean. Each room had once been a patient room, and each one we passed, we could hear whispering. I felt like I was being watched, perhaps followed. At some point, a door slammed behind us, and someone or something laughed. It was a low, rasping wheeze far down the hall. We heard footsteps on the stairs, but still no evidence of any people. Not a single footprint or handprint. No disturbed dust. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, or more out of what should be ordinary. Okay. The third floor is where it got even worse, if you can believe that. It's worth noting it had been uncomfortably cold in the building since we walked in, despite it being early September. But suddenly, it was bitterly cold, yet the humidity and acrid stench of despair and panic remained, nearly suffocating us as we walked. We checked every room. Some were empty, some were filled with debris, and most of it, if not all, were broken windows and busted out plywood coverings. It was uncomfortable and somewhat nauseating. The air felt thick. We had to finish checking the building, though. Finally, as we were walking towards the other end of the hall, we saw someone. I was almost relieved to see another living person. They started walking towards us, and I told them it was time to leave. They were trespassing, and the police were coming. They kept walking towards us, and my coworker told them to leave louder than I had. They still kept walking towards us. We both shouted at them to leave, and we didn't want them coming any closer to us. The person was probably about 6 feet away by now, so I decided to shine my light in their face as a last-ditch attempt to convince them to just turn around and leave. Okay. What we saw couldn't have been human. Where there should have been a face was nothing but twisted and haunting features. I have goosebumps. A jagged mouth with rotting teeth and empty eye sockets. A clearly broken nose dripping black blood. A hand with fingers bent at grotesque angles reached for us as it screamed. And I was frozen. I couldn't move, despite every molecule of my being screaming to turn and run. It was as if something was clinging to my legs and holding me in place. In sheer panic and desperation, I swung my flashlight at it and screamed back and threw my radio at it. The radio simply passed right through its head, and it screamed again, this time piercing, guttural, unholy. My coworker grabbed my arm, and suddenly I was able to move again. So we turned and sprinted back in the direction we came from. It chased us, howling, as we barreled down the stairs. We saw the front doors, but they were closed, despite having left them wide open when we came in. Whatever it was, didn't pass the threshold. It just continued to scream after us. All I remember after that is running directly to my car, getting in, and driving away. Foolishly, we went back the following day to retrieve the radio, and there was absolutely no trace of us having been there the night before. No footprints. Nothing was disturbed at all. Written on the wall near the stairs on the 3rd floor was a message in blood. "What have you done to me?" in all capital letters. I have never experienced anything like it since, nor do I want to. I occasionally see it in my dreams and wake up on the verge of vomiting, close to panicking. Oh my goodness. Miles says that about a week later during the day, they did have to go back again. This time they called the police, but he did snag some photos. I'm going to put a few here. All right, guys, let me have it. What are we thinking? Also, I'm sure Miles will be in the comments, so definitely let us know your thoughts. And if you have a creepy story of your own, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, you gotta follow for more creepy story time.
So if you follow me, you know that I love sharing paranormal encounters, my personal experiences, other stories, spooky stuff. That's just my vibe. But tell me why the other day I'm doing my homework and it's to listen to his recorded lecture and take notes, right? So I have my headphones on, well, they're in my ears, and I'm listening to this, right? 2 minutes into this video, this man in the lecture starts talking like a straight effing demon. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Like the D word, you know? And the voice is distorted. Like, I get so freaked out. I pull those headphones so fast out of my ears, and my fiance looks at me like, what the hell's going on? And I'm like trying to tell him like what I'm hearing. So then I unplug them and I'm like, listen to this. And he's like, what the hell are you watching? And I'm trying to explain like, dude, this is my homework. Like, tell him what's happening, right? And I fast forward the video because I'm thinking maybe there's a glitch in the lecture. No, the whole video, like the rest of the video, it's like that. And I don't even want to keep listening to it because I'm getting scared at this point. I start thinking like, what if it's something going through my laptop, like trying to get to me? So I exit the video and I like completely shut it off. And then like an hour later I go back in and the video's perfectly fine. But I'm a little creeped out now listening to it, right? Because I'm like, dude, what if something is trying to come across through electronics? And I've heard that things can go through. And I've been thinking about it more so because after that, like 2 more spooky experiences happened to me. But I'm gonna leave those for another video. I don't know, leave in the comments like, what do you think it was? Maybe it was just a glitch in the video, and I keep thinking that maybe it was. But the fact that it continued throughout the video, and this was a 20-minute video, so I'm like 2 minutes into the video, 18 minutes still of this voice. What do you guys think?
If one day one of your family members told you that he's hearing a noise inside your house, then let me tell you that you should believe him immediately and start tracking that noise unless you want to finish with something like this in your rooftop. This whole thing started with a couple who were living in a big ass house. Now this couple right here, you know, they were living a happy and a peaceful life until one day the wife told her husband that sometimes she hears noises near the garage when it's late at night. After hearing that from his wife, the husband was confused at first. He was like, bro, what are you talking about? No, you're probably imagining stuff. But you see, the wife kept insisting. She was like, bro, I know what I heard. Sometime I hear like a knocking noise and it's near the garage. You should check it out. So this is where the husband was like, okay, you know what? I'll check it out. So the husband kept waiting for a while until he really heard that noise. So his reaction was like, bro, I thought you were joking about that noise. There's really a noise coming from the garage. What? So his wife was like, bro, why would I lie about this? I told you there is a noise coming from the garage. No, just go check it out. Okay, hold on. Let me bring my phone first. I want to record this. Why the hell would you want to record this? So this is where the husband picked up his phone and his balls with it and decided to enter the garage. First thing that he saw when he entered the garage was the attic door moving by itself. Yes, this whole thing right here was shaking. So this is where he nearly pissed his pants, but then he remembered that he's the man of the house and the emergency contact, so he decided to open it and check the attic. I don't know if he did this on purpose or he was simply nervous, but you see, when he pulled the string to open the attic door, this whole thing fell and it made a lot of noise, and it was certainly not helping. When he made it to the attic, he really scanned every angle. He went like, and to his surprise, nobody was there. So who was making that noise, you know, knocking on the attic door? Well, for that, you just have to wait for the part 2. Alright, I'm joking. We don't do that here. Let me finish the story. The husband came back to his wife and told her that he couldn't find anything or anyone in the attic. And they were both confused because there was a noise that nobody was there, you know. So they were like, okay, I guess it's okay, I guess. We'll just have to wait for tomorrow and see what happens. Next day, around the same time, they both heard the noise again. Only this time, it wasn't inside the house, but outside, near the shed. Just like the last time, the husband was like, alright, let me check this real quick, alright? So, nothing's here. If we turn around, nothing's... What the hell is that? You see, while checking this shed, I don't know if it's a shed really, you call it whatever you want to call it. Anyways, while checking this whole piece of crap, he saw something moving, and he only saw it because of this gap right here. So he immediately started running after that thing he saw, but it was too late. That thing was too fast and he couldn't catch it. Oh, the next day, around the same time, you better start counting the days here because this is day 3, by the way. They both heard the same noise again. So this is where the husband was like, oh my god, he took that personally. He needed to catch whoever is doing this. Obviously, he checked the last 2 places where the noises came from, you know, the attic and then the weird ass shed. He couldn't find anything. So this is where he was like, okay, this thing, whoever's doing this gotta be right here, right now, in this place right here. He was sure that whoever's doing this was here because this is the last thing that they own that he didn't check. So he entered that thing and then he started scanning the area again. He went like, alright, what if I move my head up? Ah!
What is that noise? 'Something is banging around and making noise in one of our sheds. I'm not really sure what to expect. I'm gonna go check it out. Two a.m. The wife just woke up, said she thought someone was playing in our back shed. I hope not, because it's almost falling apart. It wouldn't be very safe, but I'm gonna come out here and have a look around and see if any of the neighborhood kids are messing around or anything. We'll get quiet here for a second.
No, despite the fact that the guy does not know how to run respectfully, he's slow as fuck. What the hell is this? Some people think that this thing is a homeless person. Respectfully, no. Why is a homeless person dressed like a Power Ranger? And most importantly, what the hell is he doing up there? Some people, you know, other people think that this guy is a thief. That's why he's dressed in all black, because he wants to rob the house. Other people are like, nah, this is just some random guy, a jobless guy who's trying to prank the couple. And honestly, I don't know what the hell is this. I just know that if I saw this, you know, I would react the same.
Imagine living in the middle of the woods and gifts keep randomly appearing on your doorstep. If you're new here, I'm Krista, and on my account, I tell spooky stories either from the internet or submitted by viewers. When I was 16, I moved to a small cabin in the middle of the woods with my dad. The kind of place where you can hear the wind through the trees all night and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. At first, everything was normal, quiet and peaceful. Then it started. Small things at first, a stick leaning against the door, a stone placed on the porch, a scrap of cloth I didn't recognize. I thought it was kids from the town playing a joke, so I ignored it. But then it got worse. One night, I woke up to something scratching at the window. But not lightly. It was like digging its fingers into the glass. I grabbed a flashlight, shined it outside, and there was nothing there, just the trees swaying back and forth in the wind. The next morning, I found tracks. Long, thin, and human-shaped, but the toes were all wrong. Too many and all pointing in the wrong directions. They led from the woods, across the yard, and stopped at the edge of the porch. It started leaving gifts every night. Blackened animal bones, twisted roots, broken dolls. Once, it left a small note carved into bark. It just said one word, home. I tried to ignore it. I barricaded the windows, kept my doors locked, but I started seeing it in the woods during the day. Just standing, watching, always at the edge of the tree line. Too tall to be a human, hunched over, arms that almost touched the ground. Its head was small and sharp, and the eyes white and featureless. Then it started following me to school. I'd catch glimpses of it between trees, behind barns, crouching in empty fields. Every time I looked, it was closer. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran into the woods, trying to find where it came from. I stumbled into a clearing I hadn't noticed before. The ground was littered with things it had left before. Dolls, bones, clothes. In the center, it stood, watching and waiting. It didn't move, but I could feel its attention. Its eyes almost burned into me. I ran, through the trees, through the mud, and straight back to the cabin. When I slammed the door, I could hear it moving outside. It was almost like sliding and scraping along the ground. It circled the cabin all night. The next morning, everything I'd left outside, the broom, the chair, even my trash can, had been arranged neatly at the edge of the porch, facing me. I moved shortly after. I've never gone back. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear it in the woods, waiting, leaving gifts, reminding me it knows where I am. No, I hate that. I actually hate that so much. I want to know what it wanted you to do with the gifts. Did it want you to accept them and bring them inside? And I want to know if you had accepted those gifts, would it have still haunted you like that? Also, what is this? I've never heard of a creature like this before. This one really freaks me out. And the fact that it was scraping along the ground and not walking too. Oh my god. I'm good. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I'll catch them if I can. And I will see you in the next one.
Talk about vampires a lot on Spooky Scary Storytime, with listeners writing in all the time about their encounters with what they believe to be vampires. And the other day I got a troll comment from someone who claimed that all modern accounts of vampires were actually stolen from French authors in the 1700s. I looked into this claim and it turns out it's a lie. And the lore of vampires goes back a lot farther, at least to 3000 BCE in Sumerian and Assyrian belief. How do we know that people believed in vampires that long ago? Because in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization where these beliefs came from, people were obsessed with keeping records. Ancient scribes were obsessed with writing everything down, and so they pressed wet cuneiform into clay tablets that hardened like stone. Since then, archaeologists have recovered thousands of these tablets from ancient ruins, from royal libraries of people like Assyrian kings, and from temple archives. These tablets included incantations and rituals to protect against what they believed were vampires. All of that said, it's not just rumor, it's not just gossip that people believed in it that long ago. There's actual proof. Why did the ancient Mesopotamians believe in vampires? Well, back then, besides obsessively keeping records, people were really concerned with irrigation systems and with living in tight-knit family compounds, and they were also obsessed with religion. There's some argument among scholars as to why they were so religious, but life was extremely harsh, and one of the arguments is that this allowed people to have some sense of control over the extreme heat, the flash flooding, the constant threats of disease, famine, and death. Infant mortality was extremely high. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous, and unexplained disease could wipe out entire families overnight. Back then, there was no germ theory, there was no modern medicine, and so all people really had were these priests that claimed to know everything. And so religion became the center of everything. Mesopotamians were polytheistic, meaning they saw gods in the spirit world in every aspect of daily life. And they also believed in the necessity of proper burial rites. And if you didn't give someone food, drink, and proper burial, enter the underworld that they knew as Irkalla, they believed that your soul would get trapped and you were doomed to wander the earth. So enter the Adimu or Akimu, depending on which record you're looking at. And these were thought to be the vengeful, restless spirits of those who died suddenly, so like starvation, drowning, or weren't given proper burial. And they were denied entry to the afterlife. So they were doomed to wander the earth, and they would sneak into homes and drain the life force of the living. They were believed to go for anyone with a pulse, but they especially sought out the young or the elderly or anyone that was generally perceived as weak, and they spread disease. If family tragedy struck, they were the ones to blame. And they were also believed to be able to inspire crime in otherwise good people. And so families tried to appease them by offering funeral meals whenever someone passed. But if they were ignored, they were known to come and wreak havoc on the family. Would just destroy everything if they were not appeased. And closely related to the Akimu were these two vampire-adjacent entities that were depicted as female. One was known as Lilitu. She was a seductive wind goddess, and some scholars argue that she actually inspired the biblical Lilith. Even more terrifying was Lamashtu, who was this monstrous demoness who was depicted with a lion's head, donkey teeth, bird talons, and bloodstained hands. She was known to target pregnant women and babies and young children because actually back then, some bodies of pregnant women and children were sometimes found with their blood completely drained, and people had no explanation. And so they thought that she was feasting on the liquid that ran through these people's veins. They had no other explanation. And so pregnant women often wore amulets to protect against her. But basically, she just embodied the ancient horror of losing a child when there really wasn't any medicine besides incantations and amulets. So while none of these entities were what we think of as Hollywood vampires or the entities that we see depicted in movies today, they were explanations for the unexplained. People lived in a world of real unexplained danger. Back then, proper burial and ritual wasn't just tradition or because it was respectable, it was protection against the restless dead. All of these beliefs sort of laid the groundwork for other civilizations that popped up and adopted and evolved these beliefs that led to what we believe as the modern day vampire. The next record I could find of what we believe could be taken as modern day vampires is in 5 BCE in ancient Rome. This is getting really long, but if you want me to continue this history lesson on vampires, let me know and I will be happy to cover different civilizations and what they believed and how we got to where we are today.
The Stanley Hotel is probably one of the creepiest hotels in America. Now, there's a reason why horror stories are based on this place. It was built in 1907 by a man named Oscar Stanley. Now, he contracted tuberculosis, and he was looking for a place up in the mountains where he felt he could get better and heal. So he finds this place in Estes Park, and he decides to build this glorious hotel. And he ends up actually getting better. And he would live a long life, but this hotel became sort of the focal point of many stories and legends. Now, there's a lot of unknowns about the Stanley Hotel. For instance, there is a cemetery nearby that you can hike to. Not many people know about, but it's considered one of the haunted places in this area. The Stanley also has all of these secret tunnels and caves that are underneath the hotel itself. But the scariest room in this hotel is probably room 401. Now, room 401 actually has a case where there was a woman checked into the room, and one night she went into the bathtub and took her own life. In fact, in Stephen King's famous movie, The Shining, that bathtub scene is based on real events. But it's said that later there was a maid who went in to clean this room one night. And as she's cleaning, she begins to feel very ill. She lays down in the bed. The next thing the employees remember is that she began acting very erratic. Thinking that she was possessed, they actually performed an exorcism in this room. And since these events, this room has been considered to be the most haunted room in America. Guests report feelings of being watched, a woman in the shower. There is this strong presence of a man who's said to take a liking to females. But there is a very creepy story that took place in this hotel. There was a woman who worked at the front desk. And she said it was a late night, it was very slow, when she received a phone call. She said it was a gentleman. He said he needed help, that there was something wrong, and he needed her to come right away. And when she heard that it was room 401, she was a little unnerved. As she looks through the computer, she discovers that there is no one staying in room 401. So thinking that someone might be in trouble, she decides to go up there and check out what was going on for herself. She makes her way up to the room and she gets the door open. And when she goes inside this hotel room, over in the corner, she sees a man standing there. She said, as this man turned around, he had this large scar on his face. And he runs towards her. As she tries to go out the door slams shut. And she begins grabbing at the handle, trying to get out. All of a sudden, the door released. And as she turns around, this man is gone. She quit that night and never returned to that hotel again. What if I told you that there's a place you can stay the night that is completely filled with creepy dolls? Now, in Mexico City, in the canals, there's a place called the Island of the Dolls. The story goes that in the 1950s, this man named Don Julian left his family and decided he was going to live alone. And he found solace on this small little island on the canals north of Mexico that were actually once built by the Aztecs. And for many years, he lives on this tiny little island, even builds a small little hut to live in. But it said one day, while he was walking along the canals, he discovers this young girl who had drowned. And shortly after this, in the same exact location, he finds this creepy old doll. So wanting to appease the spirit and as well sort of remember her, he takes this doll and he hangs it on a tree. But soon that doll started to take on a mind of its own. He would hear this doll whispering to him at night. Sometimes it would move on its own. And it began to tell him to get dolls and bring it to the island. So he would collect dolls from all over the world, and he would hang these things in the tree, on this hut that he built, on the ground. And it sort of became this temple to the dolls. But then one day, Don Julian began hearing this doll telling him to go to the water. And it continuously, over and over again, for weeks, beckoned him to go to the water. And then one day in 2001, they discovered Don Julian's body floating in the water. And it said still to this day, the doll is haunted and it haunts this entire island. Now, there was a small little story about this tourist who gets this local to give him a ride to the Island of the Dolls. And he says as he got there, they pull up to this little dock. And the fisherman tells him, look, I'll drop you off here, but I don't go on the island. And as soon as you get on the dock, I will leave. But I will come back at 5 o'clock. But I will not come on the island. I will be right here by the dock. If you do not come exactly at 5 o'clock, then I will leave. So he says, okay. He gets off and he makes his way onto this island. So at first, he's walking around, he's taking some pictures, and the dolls look creepy, but nothing really happened. So he began to feel kind of ill and really tired. He finds this kind of spot that wasn't as creepy, and he lays down, he takes a nap. Well, when he wakes up, he realizes it is now 6 o'clock, and he has missed this boat to take him back home. So he ends up staying on the island. As it started to get dark, he, started to get afraid because he had heard stories, he had heard the legends. But that's when all of a sudden he starts hearing something. Like these whispers. They sound like the voice of children. But he looks around, all the dolls are still, there's no wind, but he keeps hearing these voices. And then he kind of pinpoints one specifically. It tells him, go down to the water. And over again, he keeps hearing it say, go down to the water, go down to the water. So he starts to get afraid. And he makes his way to this hut where he decides, I'll stay here for the night. I'll feel a little safer. But inside this hut, there are just hundreds of dolls hanging on the walls. And as he sat down and began to get comfortable, once again, he hears these whispers. They're telling him, go down to the water. He said that's when he looked at this one specific doll that looked like it was kind of put there as some sort of altar or something that was meant to celebrate this thing. He said, it was kind of dirty and falling apart. It had these scratches on the face. Part of the hair was missing. It was very recognizable. He said as he looked at this doll, its head began to move from left to right. And he said its eyes started to blink. And he said that's when he seen the hand reach out towards him. So he runs out of this hut screaming, and he just starts running around the island. And everywhere he goes, he sees these dolls, and they are moving, and they are saying stuff to him and telling him to go down to the water. But then he notices something hanging from the tree. It's the same exact doll that he's seen inside this hut. And this thing is following him. So eventually he runs over to the dock, and he goes out to the water. And louder he can hear, go to the water, get in the river. But then he sees lights up ahead. It's the boater. He's come back looking for him. And thankfully he was able to get on the boat and go back to Mexico City. But he would never return to that island, ever, into the woods. Eastern Texas is a really eerie place. Now, this story comes out of a place near Tyler, Texas. There was this man named Nate, and Nate said this one weekend, him and his buddies decided they were going to go camping. The first night they're out in the woods, they start hearing coyotes, and they could hear this howling sound all around their campsite. And all night long, they kept hearing these howls. Well, the next day, Nate decides he's going to go out into the woods and look for some firewood. So he makes his way out down this trail, and he ends up getting lost. And for like 2 hours, he cannot find his way back to the campsite. So he decides, I'm going to climb this tree and see if I can see the fire from our campsite. So he gets up in the tree, and he can see out, a good distance, and he happens to see the smoke coming from where their camp is. So he starts screaming, help me, I'm lost, like help. He said all of a sudden he sees these birds just take off into the sky, like they just seen something. And he begins to hear a strange sound coming from the brush on the ground. And he said out behind this bush stepped what looked like a naked man walking on all fours. And he said it was just very animalistic like. And this thing crawls up to the tree that Nate is sitting in. And he said when it got to the tree, it started sniffing it like it had picked up a scent. And all of a sudden, this thing turned its head 360, and it was now looking up at Nate. And it started to say, help me, please help me. And it was repeating what Nate was saying, except it was the sound of a woman's voice. And he said he started screaming again, like, help me, please help me, like screaming for his friends. And he said finally, this thing just took off into the woods, and he hears some more noise, and there's his friends coming up to the tree. And he's like, look, there's something out in the woods, like I was lost, and like we need to get out of here, And his friends are like, what are you talking about? Like there's nothing out in the woods, like you're losing it, man. And right as he said that, they see a coyote walk by them, and they were like, okay, it's time to leave.
In the early morning hours of Saturday, March 29th, 1997, a blonde 26-year-old waitress named Kim Medlin carried a tray of filet mignon through a topless bar in Charlotte, North Carolina, while wearing a leotard and tights. She made her way through the cigar smoke-filled room, past the stage where all the half-naked women were busy pole dancing. Kim worked here at the men's club 3 or 4 nights a week, and for the most part, she liked the job. It paid well, and by working the night shift, it left her days free, so she could focus on her 2 real passions, which were taking care of her horses and decorating her brand new house. So Kim and her husband Bridger had recently bought a 7-acre plot of land outside the nearby town of Monroe, where Bridger had actually grown up. They'd spent the past year building their dream home, including a barn for their 3 horses, and now that the construction was done, they had finally started moving in and decorating. Now, as Kim delivered the filet mignons to a table of middle-aged businessmen, she glanced over at the clock on the wall, and she felt a surge of excitement when she saw that there was less than an hour left in her shift. Kim had the next 3 days off, and she planned to use all that free time to finish some of the smaller moving projects that still needed to get done, like just unpacking boxes and hanging some pictures. So she flashed the businessmen a smile and then went to check on her other tables. An hour later, a little after 2 a.m., Kim walked out the back entrance of the bar, now wearing a baggy sweatshirt instead of her work uniform, and she called out a goodbye over her shoulder to some coworkers, and then walked over to where her red Jeep was parked along the side of the building. She got in, dropped her purse onto the cow print seat cover on the passenger seat, turned on the car, and then turned on some music for the hour-long drive home. A half an hour later, Kim drove south down Old Charlotte Highway, a secluded 2-lane road that was pretty much deserted at this hour. She used to find this commute kind of relaxing, but lately, it had been making her nervous to be driving alone late at night. And the reason for that was because a couple of weeks ago, while she was driving home from work around this same time of night, she'd been involved in a really scary road rage incident. Another vehicle had come up from behind and started tailgating her and honking their horn at her repeatedly for really no apparent reason. Kim had been afraid that this was a customer from the men's club who was now following her home, and it freaked her out so much that she'd actually pulled over into a convenience store parking lot because she saw there was a police car parked in there as well, and so she'd gone right over to the officer to ask for help. He'd promised to go and try and track down this road rager, and he'd even sent out a broadcast over the police radio, telling all the other officers to keep an eye out for Kim's car on the night she was working in case anyone gave her more trouble. And so now, even though, that road rager had never been caught, Kim did feel better knowing that the police had her back. But again, because the road rager had not been caught, she was still a bit scared about driving home alone. So tonight, to calm her nerves, she fished out her cell phone out of her purse and just called her husband, Bridger. When he answered, he told her that he was actually on the road too. He was still driving back from a gig DJing at a prom in a town 2 hours away, but he was almost home. After chatting for a few minutes, Bridger told Kim that he was actually pulling into their driveway and that he would call her right back once he got inside the house. So Kim said fine and said goodbye, and they hung up, and she kept on driving. Then, about 15 minutes later, so a little before 3 a.m., her phone rang. And it was Bridger again, calling back like he had promised he would. And he asked Kim if she was close, and she told him that she was just passing by Union Station Restaurant, which meant she was maybe about 20 minutes away from home. Bridger said he was pretty tired and he was getting ready for bed, and in case he was asleep by the time she got in, he wished her goodnight. And Kim said goodnight back, and then she hung up, and she put her phone down on the passenger seat. But just as Kim turned her attention back towards the road, a sudden bright light almost blinded her. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw headlights right behind her. About an hour later, Kim's husband Bridger sat up in bed and looked over at the clock on his nightstand. It was 3:59 a.m., an hour after having spoken to Kim. I mean, she should have been home 20 minutes after that phone call, and she still wasn't back. So he got out of bed and he checked every room in their 2-story house, but Kim wasn't in any of them. There was no sign of her. Then Bridger looked out the window and he saw her Jeep wasn't in the driveway either. So at this point, he hurried into the kitchen and he picked up the phone and he dialed Kim's cell phone number. And it rang a few times, and then a strange male voice answered. Bridger asked who he was speaking to, and the man told him he was a police officer with the Monroe Public Safety Department. Bridger asked him, okay, well, where's my wife? And the officer told him that he didn't know. He had just come across a red Jeep idling on the side of the road and found this phone inside of it, and it was ringing, and so he answered it. But he said, there's nobody here. Several minutes later, so this is a little bit after 4 a.m. on March 29th, 1997, Assistant Chief Bobby Hulk, a police investigator with the Monroe Public Safety Department, drove north along Old Charlotte Highway. He drove his patrol car past parking lots and houses until he reached the very edge of town. And finally, he saw what he was looking for. A red Jeep parked along the opposite side of the road, with another patrol car parked right behind it. He pulled a U-turn and parked on the shoulder, and as he got out of his car, he recognized Captain David Simpson standing there, waiting for him. Simpson told Chief Hulk that he had just found this Jeep idling on the side of the road about 15 minutes ago with its headlights on, and he had walked up. There had been nobody inside of it, but when he looked in, there was a cell phone, and it began to ring. And so, acting on instinct, he answered the phone, and it was a man named Bridger Medlin who was calling saying, I'm looking for my wife. This is her phone. She hasn't come home. And Captain Simpson also said that he actually recognized this Jeep from a random run-in he had 2 weeks earlier outside of a convenience store with Kim Medlin. And so he put it together and he's like, okay, Bridger's calling. This is definitely Kim's car, but Kim's nowhere to be found. And Hulk actually recognized Kim's name because he actually happened to be friends with Kim's husband, Bridger. And so he pulled out his flashlight and he began looking inside the Jeep, and right away he saw there was a wallet lying open on the passenger seat. And when he looked inside the wallet, there were credit cards, there was cash, but there was like this clear section of the wallet where obviously you would slide your driver's license, and there was nothing there. So it very much looked like her license had been pulled out on purpose. Now, their initial theory was, okay, well, maybe Kim got pulled over by a police officer and took out her license to hand to the cop. But in a department as small as Monroe's, there were only a few officers on duty at this time of night. And when Assistant Chief Hulk asked Captain Simpson, had any of the on-duty officers pulled anybody over that night, Simpson was already all over it. He had checked. And he said, no, none of our officers pulled anybody over. So this made Hulk wonder if maybe Kim had been pulled over by somebody posing as a cop. There had actually been dozens of reports over the years of so-called blue light bandits pretending to be police officers in order to harass drivers, especially young women. But those cases were really quite rare, even though they did happen, so Hulk didn't want to jump to any conclusions quite yet. Just then, Hulk heard a truck engine and saw headlights approaching up the highway. So he set the wallet back down on the seat and then walked over to where a black pickup truck was now pulling to a stop right behind Hulk's car. A tall man with blonde hair got out of the driver's seat, and right away Hulk knew who it was. It was his friend and Kim's husband, Bridger. And Bridger looked frantic, and he demanded to know what had happened to his wife. But Hulk told him to calm down, that they were here to try to figure out what happened to his wife and where she went. Hulk went on to say that, look, like we showed up and we just found her car here. But there were no broken windows or slashed tires or any sign of a struggle, so it was possible that maybe Kim just ran into car trouble and maybe she went out to go find help. But then, without asking for permission, Bridger pushed past Hulk and just climbed right inside of the Jeep's driver's seat and said, well, let's test your theory right now and see whether the car was working. Hulk told him to get out of the Jeep, but Bridger just totally ignored him, and then he put his wife's car in drive and moved it forward a few inches. Then he put it in reverse and he drove it backward, ultimately parking it in its original place, showing that it worked just fine. And even though at this point Hulk was kind of annoyed with Bridger for what he had just done, he couldn't help but think, this is bad, something's going on here. And so Hulk walked over to his car and he radioed the dispatcher for reinforcements. And he asked them to bring a police dog so they could try to track Kim's scent in case she left on foot. A few minutes later, 2 more police cars pulled up to the scene, and a few officers and a police dog got out. Hulk opened the doors to the Jeep, and the dog went in and sniffed around, getting familiar with the scent of Kim's belongings. Then the dog seemed to pick up a trail on the ground, and so the officers told Bridger, who clearly wanted to go with them, to stay put, stay with your truck, and then they followed the dog down the road for about 100 yards or so until it turned onto a driveway. Hulk and the others followed the dog up this long driveway towards a small house nestled in the trees right off the highway, and the dog sniffed all the way up to the garage and then stopped. That was where Kim's trail ended. And so Hulk went up to the house and rang the doorbell, and a minute later, a man answered. And despite the late hour, he looked totally awake and not particularly surprised to see cops at his door. Hulk asked the man who he was and whether or not he had seen or heard anything unusual in the past couple of hours near his property. The man said his name was Nathan Hargett, and about an hour ago, so maybe around 3:45 a.m., he'd been woken up by a strange car loitering near his garage. Nathan said he hadn't recognized the car, but he noticed that it had Texas plates, and that there also had been a woman with blonde hair in the back seat. Hulk asked Nathan for permission to search his property, and Nathan told them to go right ahead. And so Hulk directed the other officers to search the inside of the house, while he clicked on his flashlight and headed over to the garage. When he got there, he turned the handle of a door on the side of the garage, and he found it was unlocked. So he pushed the door open, and he shined his flashlight inside, but all he saw was a truck and some gardening tools. There was no sign of Kim. By the time dawn broke around 6 a.m. that morning, this had become officially a missing persons case. So police began a search of the woods around the old Charlotte Highway with help from members of the community. Meanwhile, Hulk and Simpson went back to the station to speak to one of the dispatchers who had been on duty that night. After speaking to that homeowner, Nathan, and searching his house and his garage, he had been ruled out as a suspect. So now they were focused on finding that car with the Texas plates that Nathan had seen loitering outside of his garage. So they were hoping that maybe there was a report of a traffic stop or maybe a suspicious car in the area or anything that might help figure out who was driving that car. But the dispatcher said again that really there had been no stops, nothing that night. However, there had been one incident in the area that night. It was around 2 a.m., so it was about an hour before Kim was last heard from. They'd gotten a call about a car that had run into a ditch not too far from where Kim's Jeep was found. Hulk asked who had responded to that call, and the dispatcher said it was car 491, which was driven by a young rookie officer named Josh Griffin. Hulk immediately gave Officer Griffin a phone call and asked if he had seen or heard anything unusual while he was out responding to that car in the ditch. But Griffin said no. He actually said that his shift was over around the time that driver had flagged him down for help, so he had actually just called for a tow truck, and when it got there, maybe a little bit after 2:30 a.m., Griffin said he just went home. Hulk hung up the phone feeling pretty disappointed. Bridger said the last time he heard from his wife Kim was around 3 a.m., so if this car was already being towed away by 2:30 a.m., then it definitely was not the same car that Nathan saw loitering outside of his garage. And the driver of that car in the ditch was likely not a suspect. Hulk sighed in frustration, but then another idea occurred to him. He asked Captain Simpson to elaborate on that random run-in he had had with Kim a couple of weeks earlier. Now, this was sort of a long shot to bring it up again, but Hulk wondered if maybe the same driver from the road rage incident could have maybe come back and, maybe chased Kim off the road or something. Simpson said he would go dig up the report that he had filed on the incident, and then he left to go find it. About half an hour later, Hulk sat at his desk reading through a copy of the road rage police report. It said that in the very early morning hours of Saturday, March 15th, so exactly 2 weeks before Kim's disappearance, Kim had pulled into a convenience store and flagged down Captain Simpson and another officer named Roger Griffin. So Officer Josh Griffin is the one who responded to the car stuck in the ditch. Officer Roger Griffin is actually Josh's father, and he was with Captain Simpson that night. So the report said that Simpson and his partner, Roger Griffin, had actually caught up with the car that was harassing Kim a little bit further down the road. There were two men inside the car, Eric Williams and George Connell, and they claimed that they thought Kim was actually the one harassing them by flashing her lights at them. And so to Simpson and to Griffin, it seemed like a big misunderstanding, so the officers had just let them go. But Hulk, now looking at this through a very different lens, felt like he needed to speak to Eric and George regardless. And so in the report, he found the contact information for Eric and George, and he called them both up. But it turned out they both had airtight alibis for the night of Kim's disappearance. But even still, it struck Hulk as very odd that Kim had gone missing from her car on the same road at the same time of night and on the same night of the week as the road rage incident just 2 weeks earlier. And he had a hard time believing it was all just, one big coincidence. The next day, just after sunset on Sunday, March 30th, Hulk drove down Westwood Industrial Drive, a deserted dead-end street at the edge of town, about 2 miles from where Kim's Jeep was found. And as he was driving, he saw at the end of the street there were a couple of police cars parked there. And so he pulled his own car behind them, and he got out. He walked into the trees where he could see the beams of several flashlights moving around in the darkness. And as he got closer, he saw officers putting up police tape around a small clearing. And then, on the ground in that clearing, he saw a pair of feet in sneakers poking out from underneath a pile of roofing shingles and branches. The police had gotten a call earlier that evening from two men who were part of the community search effort for Kim, and they said to police that they had found a body in the woods in this spot, but they hadn't touched it. And so now with Hulk on the scene, the forensics team removed the shingles and branches that were covering the body, and Hulk pulled out his flashlight and knelt down to get a better look, and he saw right away it was a deceased woman, and it was definitely Kim Medlin. She was only wearing a pair of shorts, a bra, and a sweatshirt that had been pulled up over her head. One side of her face was very badly beaten, and there were also cuts and bruises all over her neck, and there were some scrapes on her knees. And her necklace and wedding ring were still on, so her killer had not robbed her. Hulk stood back as the forensics team untangled Kim's sweatshirt from around her wrists so they could collect clippings of her fingernails in case she had maybe scratched off a trace of her killer's DNA. And as Hulk watched one of these forensics officers go to put the sweatshirt inside of an evidence bag, he suddenly noticed something and shouted for the officer to stop. Hulk stepped closer and he shined his flashlight on the sweatshirt's fabric, and it revealed a shoe print. And so he told the officers to send that sweatshirt to the crime lab and see if they could figure out the size and type of shoe that had left that print. But while he would have to wait for those results, he knew he had a couple of other big clues to help narrow down a suspect. The first was the location of Kim's body. Westwood Industrial Drive was known as Lover's Lane, so basically a secluded, out-of-the-way spot where people often went to be alone. And the fact that Kim's killer had thought to take her there meant they were probably a local and familiar with the area. Now, it was still theoretically possible that she'd just been run off the road by some stranger for some reason, or, maybe a customer had followed her home from work, or maybe it was a blue light bandit impersonating a police officer. But the second big clue was that there was no sign of a struggle at Kim's Jeep. And because of that, Hulk did not think she had been kidnapped by a stranger. He thought it was far more likely that she had gotten out of her car for somebody that she knew and trusted. The very next day, Monday, March 31st, Hulk sat down in an interrogation room with his friend and first murder suspect, Kim's husband, Bridger. Bridger had been really pushy and really in some ways over-involved in the investigation from literally the moment Kim's Jeep was found. He'd messed with the crime scene by getting into the Jeep without permission, and now Hulk had information that Bridger had lied about his alibi. So when Kim first went missing, Bridger had told the police that he got home around 2:30 that morning, he called Kim for a brief chat a little before 3, and then he immediately went to bed. But now, a police officer had told Hulk that he had seen Bridger's black pickup truck driving around the center of town around 2:30 a.m., which was nowhere near Bridger's house, and nowhere near the route he would have taken to get back from his DJing gig. So once Hulk sat down, immediately he could see that Bridger was visibly distraught. I mean, he's just learned that his wife was found dead. But Hulk had a job to do, and so he cut right to the chase. And he said to Bridger that, hey, this other officer said they saw your truck driving around in town. It contradicts your alibi. Why did you lie? And right away, Bridger exploded. He was so mad. And he shouted at Hulk that he couldn't believe at a time like this, you would accuse me of lying to you? You're insinuating that I hurt my wife? I didn't do this. He also yelled at Hulk for just wasting time looking at him as a suspect when there were so many clues pointing to a different story, like the lack of a struggle at the Jeep, and the rolled down window and missing driver's license, all of which made it look like a traffic stop gone wrong. Bridger said he knew Kim better than anybody, and she would never, ever get out of her car in the middle of the night for a stranger, especially after that road rage incident 2 weeks earlier. She was on edge. She never would have done that. When Hulk left the interrogation room a few minutes later, he told his team to track down security footage from around town on the night Kim was killed to see if there was proof that really Bridger was driving around when he said he was home. Because right now they had no evidence to show he was lying, and they actually just had to let Bridger go. But when Bridger was leaving, he'd been so angry and so defensive, it sort of made Hulk think that maybe Bridger did this. And in fact, the fact that Bridger had brought up that his wife would never have gotten out of the car in the middle of the night for a stranger, well, that only reinforced that she might have gotten out of the car for you, Bridger, because she knew and trusted you. But also, Hulk was thinking that another person or group of people that Kim might have gotten out of the car for would be police. Now, Hulk already knew that there were no police that pulled anybody over that night, but somebody could have pretended to be a police officer, a blue light bandit. That was a theory that did sort of make sense. Hulk thought about that bulletin that had gone out over the police radio 2 weeks ago, telling officers to be on the lookout for Kim's Jeep at certain times of the night because of that road rage incident. Now, police radios were not private, so anybody with a police scanner could have been listening in, and what they would have heard is, well, around this time of the night, this woman, Kim, often drives this road all by herself. and they basically could have just been waiting for her, knowing she was vulnerable. So Hulk picked up his phone and he began calling around to other police departments in the region, and he actually found out there had been 2 separate reports of blue light bandits harassing women recently. Now, one of the culprits had already been caught, and he was in jail when Kim was killed, so it could not have been him. But the other suspect still hadn't been found. A couple of days later, on April 4th, Assistant Chief Bobby Hulk slammed down the phone in frustration and crossed another name off a list on his notepad. It had been 5 days since Kim's body was found, and all the leads he'd had at the start of the investigation were now coming back as dead ends. When he tracked down surveillance footage from the night of Kim's disappearance, there was no sign of her husband Bridger's truck driving through town until 4 a.m., after Kim's Jeep had been found by police. So the officer who claimed to have seen Bridger's truck driving around at 2:30 did appear to have been mistaken, as Bridger said. Hulk also had reached out to Kim's manager and co-workers at the bar she worked at, thinking maybe her killer might have been a patron who followed her home. But none of them knew of any problems she had had with customers. Meanwhile, Hulk's team had spoken to a man who worked the night shift at a business that was near where Kim's Jeep had been found. He said he had left work a little before 3 a.m. on the night that Kim disappeared, and as he was waiting to turn onto Old Charlotte Highway, he had seen her red Jeep go past. And right afterwards, he saw another car that was going in the other direction make a sort of sudden, sharp 3-point turn and speed right after the Jeep. The man had said that this other car had lights on the roof and reflective tape on the rear, and he thought, or at least assumed, it was a police car, but he didn't get a good look at the markings. Now, Hulk knew that every single Monroe police officer that was on duty that night was accounted for, and they hadn't pulled anybody over at the time that Kim went missing. However, this new information certainly did support the theory that maybe Kim's killer was posing as a police officer, that they were a blue light bandit. So, Hulk had spent the past couple of days trying to track down witnesses who had seen that other blue light bandit who was recently reported in a nearby town but had never been caught, but he kept coming up dry. Nobody knew anything that could help track down that suspect. So, it seemed like the investigation was really starting to slow down. But then, Hulk's phone rang, and he answered it, and it was an expert from the forensics lab who had just finished analyzing that shoe print that had been found on Kim's sweatshirt. And so Hulk leaned forward in nervous anticipation as the expert told him the results. And when he did, Hulk knew exactly how to find Kim's killer. Based on that shoe print, witness testimony, and other forensic evidence, this is what police believe happened to Kim Medlin on March 29, 1997. Around 3 a.m., the killer was driving down Old Charlotte Highway. They'd been prowling around for hours, pulling over young women for minor traffic infractions or sometimes for doing nothing wrong at all. And as they drove, they saw a familiar red Jeep pass by. The killer had seen that Jeep coming down this road several nights a week, and they'd sort of grown obsessed with the young blonde woman who was driving it. And now they decided it was finally time to do something about that. So they pulled an abrupt 3-point turn and raced after the Jeep and flipped on their car's flashing lights. Pretty soon, the Jeep pulled over onto the shoulder, and the killer got out of their car and walked up to the driver's side window. The woman inside naturally rolled down the window, and she handed over her driver's license, which said her name was Kim Medlin. And then she politely asked what the problem was, and the killer just told her to get out of the car. Now, Kim was visibly confused, but she did as she was told. And once she was out of the car, the killer slapped a pair of handcuffs onto her wrists and then dragged her over to their car and tossed her in the back seat. Then the killer got in the driver's seat of their car as Kim began crying and insisting that she didn't do anything wrong. Why was she being arrested? But the killer wasn't listening. Their mind was racing as they realized that even though they'd been dreaming about this moment for weeks, they actually didn't really have a plan for what they would do next. And so after a moment, they pulled over and just idled for a minute while they figured out what their next move was going to be. And then an idea came to them. They put their car in drive and continued down the highway. And as they turned onto a secluded dead-end road, Kim in the back seat suddenly got very quiet. And so the killer picked up on that and looked in the rearview mirror and saw her moving around, fiddling with something behind her back. and the killer suddenly realized that in all their excitement, they'd forgotten to lock the rear doors. The killer immediately tried to lock their doors with the power locks, but before they could, the rear door opened and Kim jumped out of the moving car. And so the killer came to a hard stop. They leapt out of the car and they ran back for Kim, who was lying in the middle of the road. Her hands are still cuffed behind her. And without even thinking, the killer lifted up their flashlight and they smashed it into Kim's head. And then they stomped on her back and broke her neck. But the killer wasn't done. They reached down and they put their flashlight around Kim's neck, basically put it up against her throat, and then they pulled back on their arms, basically creating sort of a noose around her neck with this flashlight. And they held it like that, and they pulled as tight as they could until Kim stopped moving. After that, they dragged her body off the road and into the woods, where they removed her handcuffs and covered her body with branches and debris to hide it. Then the killer went home and cleaned up their car, making sure there was no evidence that would tie them to the murder. But they didn't realize they had actually left behind one crucial piece of evidence at the scene, that shoe print on Kim's sweatshirt. The print had a very distinct V-shaped pattern on the tread, which made it very easy to identify. And so weeks later, the forensics lab traced that print back to a shoe that was made by the Thorogood Company, a supplier of military and uniform footwear. And that particular model happened to be the exact same shoe issued to officers in the Monroe Public Safety Department, which meant Kim's killer was not just posing as a police officer. They were a police officer. The killer was Officer Josh Griffin, the off-duty rookie cop who had responded to a car in a ditch about a half an hour before Kim went missing. It would turn out Josh had learned the details about Kim's vehicle and late-night driving patterns from his father, Officer Roger Griffin, after his father told him about that road rage incident that he and Captain Simpson had responded to on March 15th. And so Josh had basically been on the lookout for Kim's Jeep ever since. Josh Griffin was arrested on May 30th, 1997, about 2 months after Kim's murder. He was eventually convicted of first-degree kidnapping and murder and sentenced to life in prison. As for his motive, the best we can offer is he became obsessed with Kim and attacked her.
Tonight, we are going back to 1985, England. Fires of unknown origin broke out one after another. Private homes, restaurants, shops, the locations varied. But there was one strange thing they all had in common. The firefighters who extinguished each blaze kept finding the same thing. A painting, a boy in tears. The fires had been fierce enough to burn buildings to the ground, yet somehow the painting was completely unharmed, not even a trace of soot. So this happened not once or twice, but every single time. The same painting turned up at every fire scene, and every time it had not burned. September 1985, a family home burned to the ground. The wife and children were rushed to hospital with burns. October of the same year, a pizza restaurant was completely gutted. Another family home was destroyed. 2 paintings hanging on either side of the walls were reduced to ash. But the painting of the crying boy was untouched. More than 40 incidents in total. The same painting was found at every fire scene. People began to whisper, could that painting be causing the fires? Could it be cursed? What secret exactly is hidden in this painting? 1950s, Venice, Italy. After the Second World War, an Italian painter was working as a painting restorer in Venice. His name was Bruno Amadio, though that too may not have been his real name. He went by many aliases: Giovanni Bergolin, Franco Seville, Angelo Bergolin. Art historians who later tried to trace him found almost nothing. No coherent biography, no confirmed birthplace, no reliable records of any kind. It was as though he had deliberately erased himself from history. What we do know is that in the ruins of post-war Europe, surrounded by orphan children whose parents had been killed in the war, Amadio began to paint, and his subjects were always the same: young children. wide, dark eyes, tears streaming down their cheeks. He captured something in those faces that no other painter quite managed. A grief so raw and complete that it seemed to go beyond ordinary sadness. Something older, something that didn't belong to childhood at all. The paintings sold well. Tourists bought them, department stores mass-produced prints. Through the 1960s and 1970s, the prints spread across Europe, then Britain, then the world. More than 50,000 copies of The Crying Boy were sold in Britain alone. People hung them in living rooms, bedrooms, hallways, and they thought the boy's sad eyes were beautiful. They thought the paintings were simply moving works of art. But there were whispers, even then. Stories circulated quietly. And then came the boy, and the story that followed him would outlast them all. Tonight, we are going back to 1985, England. Fires of unknown origin broke out one after another. Private homes, restaurants, shops, the locations varied. But there was one strange thing they all had in common. The firefighters who extinguished each blaze kept finding the same thing. A painting, a boy in tears. The fires had been fierce enough to burn buildings to the ground, yet somehow the painting was completely unharmed, not even a trace of soot. So this happened not once or twice, but every single time. The same painting turned up at every fire scene, and every time it had not burned. September 1985, a family home burned to the ground. The wife and children were rushed to hospital with burns. October of the same year, a pizza restaurant was completely gutted. Another family home was destroyed. 2 paintings hanging on either side of the walls were reduced to ash. But the painting of the crying boy was untouched. More than 40 incidents in total. The same painting was found at every fire scene. People began to whisper, could that painting be causing the fires? Could it be cursed? What secret exactly is hidden in this painting?
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Amadio cared for the boy, fed him, gave him shelter, and began to paint him obsessively from every angle in every shade of sorrow. The paintings poured out of him, dozens of canvases, all bearing the same face, the same tears, the same expression that seemed to hold the weight of something unforgivable. The other version is darker. Some say Amadio needed the boy to cry, and when he didn't cry naturally, when the tears stopped, or when the boy seemed to be calming, the painter found ways to start them again. The method most often described is that he would light a match and hold the flame close to the child's face. A child who had watched his parents die in fire, made to cry by fire, so that his expression could be captured on canvas forever. Whether this is true, no one can say. What is certain is that the resulting paintings carry something in them that is very difficult to explain. People who have seen the originals describe a feeling of being watched, of the eyes following them across the room, of a presence in the painting that has no business being there. Amadio's studio burned down. The fire was severe. He lost everything, his equipment, his unsold canvases, his livelihood. He stood in the ruins and remembered the priest's warning, and for the first time, he believed it. He blamed Don Bonillo. He accused the child of arson, and he drove the boy away. Don Bonillo ran, weeping as always, and was never seen again, or so it seemed. With the boy gone, Amadio's troubles did not end. They worsened. As the prints spread across Europe, strange stories followed them. Fires in houses where the paintings hung. And always, the painting survived, unscathed. So Amadio's name became attached to the curse. People stopped commissioning him. No one wanted to look at his paintings, let alone buy them. The man who had created one of the most successful print series in history found himself unemployable, avoided, feared, and he died in the early 1980s, reportedly unaware that his paintings had become objects of terror across Britain, reportedly never having learned what became of the boy he had driven away, the story he never knew. 1976, the outskirts of Barcelona. Police received a report of a car crash. A vehicle had struck a wall at speed and exploded into flames. When officers arrived, they found the driver had been burned beyond recognition. His body consumed so completely that identification was impossible. They searched the wreckage. In the glove box, which inexplicably had survived the fire intact, they found part of a driver's license. The name on the license was Don Bonillo. He was 19 years old. The boy who had brought fire to every place he ever lived had finally been consumed by it himself, alone, in an explosion on a road outside Barcelona. The only thing that survived was a small identification card, much like a painting that never burned. September 4th, 1985, Rotherham, South Yorkshire, England. Ron and May Hall had lived in their terraced council home for 27 years. It was an ordinary house on an ordinary street. On their living room wall hung an ordinary cheap print, the painting of a crying boy, purchased from a department store, the kind sold by the tens of thousands across Britain. The fire started in the kitchen. A chip pan overheated and burst into flames. By the time it was brought under control, the entire ground floor had been destroyed. Furniture, curtains, appliances reduced to ash and char. One item survived. The print of the crying boy hung on the living room wall, surrounded by the blackened wreckage of everything around it. It was undamaged, not singed, not warped, not even darkened by smoke. Ron Hall was furious. He told a newspaper reporter who came to cover the story, "If I find out who painted it, I will sue him." Then he paused. "I want to burn it myself to make sure it doesn't come back." What made the story different from any ordinary house fire was a single additional detail. The fire had been investigated by Peter Hall, a local firefighter, who also happened to be Ron's brother. And Peter Hall told the reporter something that changed everything. This was not the first time he had seen this. He had attended at least 15 house fires, he said, where everything was destroyed. In each one, the only item found intact was the print of the crying boy. It happened so consistently that he and his colleagues had made a private pact among themselves. None of them would ever allow this painting into their own homes. Peter Hall had told his own brother. Ron and May had just laughed it off. Their house burned down 3 months later. The Sun ran the story on its front page, blazing curse of the crying boy. And within 24 hours, the newspaper had been flooded with responses. Hundreds of readers called in, all with the same story. "I have this painting. My house caught fire. The painting didn't burn." Rotherham Fire Station Officer Alan Wilkinson began keeping a personal log. He would eventually record more than 50 fires in which the crying boy print survived. He was a skeptic, but he could not explain it. His wife had her own theory. "I always say," she told reporters, "it's the tears that put the fire out."
My mum passed away when I was 23, and especially with Mother's Day coming up tomorrow, it's really brought feelings back of how hard it can be being a mother without your mother being here. And I guess the thing I struggle with the most is that my mother never got to meet Winnie. I'm going to be trying not to cry. Never met Winnie, but there's a side of me that really thinks she still is here with me. So I'll tell you a story that happened on why I do believe there's something after when we die. I always get emotional when I tell this story, so bear with me. It was the night before her funeral. I had this dream, and I was setting up to do a client's nails in my kitchen for some reason, and it was a really important client, a VIP client, a celebrity, and I was really nervous and anxious. Everything had to be perfect, and I hear a ring on the doorbell. It was the client coming in to get her nails done with me. I wasn't ready. I told my dad, go and greet the client and stall her a little bit just so I can finish preparing my table, and I was like manic, and I sent my dad off, and I'm like frantic, and I looked to the side of the kitchen, and my mum's there. She wasn't ill anymore. She was just her happy, healthy self that I remembered before she got really unwell, and she just looked like she was glowing. She was healthy and happy, and I knew in this dream this was her spirit. Like, it's really weird, I can't explain the feeling, but this was like a way for her to communicate to me in my dream, and I was aware of this in the dream. It wasn't just like I was dreaming of my mum. It was like a physical presence in my dream, and I run up to her because I missed her so much, and I hugged her, and I could feel myself hugging her in the dream. And I said to her, Mum, oh my God, like, you're okay. I haven't seen you, like, in ages. Like, I'm so happy you're here. Please stay a little bit longer. I want you to see Dad. And, And she just helped me. And she said, Georgia, I can't stay for long. I need to go. I don't have long. I've just come to tell you that I'm okay and you don't have to worry anymore. And I was like, no, please, Mum, please stay a little bit longer. Like, I don't want you to go. And she said, I can't, I have to go. And then I kind of looked away, and when I looked back, she was gone. Since this dream, I have dreamt about my mum in multiple dreams, but it's never been the same feeling. It's just been a dream about my mum, or like I dreamt that my mum was in the dream and we were doing stuff. But this dream was so real, I cannot explain it. Like, it was like I was aware in the dream that this was her spirit. I had a whole different feeling that I can't explain. And there's this side of me that always thinks she is looking over me, and she has met Winnie, and I feel like she has sent Winnie to me. My first Mother's Day, being a mother without my own mother, feels okay, because I know she is still watching over me, and I genuinely do believe that.
People ask me a lot, did I dream about my loved one who passed? Was that real? And I feel like she gave such a great example of how, yes, it is very real. But she gave both examples, how she had this one dream where her soul and her mother's soul came face to face, and they were together again, just like when they were together in body. She felt it, she knew it. Yes, that was very real. That was exactly that. Now, Mom isn't going to be in every single one of them, but she still is there in those dreams where you feel like she wasn't feeling that same presence, but they're just sort of doing tasks, day-to-day stuff. Mom is still there. Those tasks, those day-to-day things, is us assisting each other, the souls assisting each other on their journey. And the reason why it sometimes doesn't feel as impactful is because it's about us acclimating to this new change where the person is no longer in body. So there's an acclimation process, and these dreams that feel more day to day are actually you acclimating to this new relationship. So they're still impactful, and they're a huge part of our grieving process and healing through the grieving process. When someone passes, the grieving process allows us to learn how to communicate with them on a different level. So we're used to communicating in body. Well, now we're being asked to communicate soul to soul, consciousness to consciousness. Those in body are being asked to raise their consciousness so they can now hear their loved one, see their loved one, and speak their language. They're speaking from a place of higher consciousness. They're no longer speaking from a place that is in body. So we have to learn their language. And that's what she was going through when she had that moment where the consciousness were saying goodbye to the physical aspect of the relationship. just the physical aspect of the relationship, not the consciousness part of the relationship. And then the rest of the dreams were, like she was saying, they're kind of like your day to day, we're doing stuff. That's her now learning how to communicate with her mother in the language her mother now speaks, which is whatever word you want to use, telepathy, higher consciousness, intuition, psychic ability. And this applies to all of us. This applies to all of us. When we grieve, when we allow ourselves to grieve, it assists in disconnecting us from the physical body, and the physical connection actually will ultimately bring us to a deeper form of communication, which is that higher consciousness, which is the communication that never dies, never goes away, that has no limits. The physical body has limits. But when we learn how to communicate with our higher consciousness, soul to soul, if you will, there's no limits there. Now, this communication lasts literally forever and beyond each lifetime.
We explored an abandoned hotel and we heard a woman scream from the inside. This happened years ago, but I still think about it all the time. My fiance and I decided to go explore this old abandoned hotel near Lake Elsinore. At first, it just felt like your typical rundown building, broken windows, lots of dust, abandoned rooms, that kind of a thing. Until we entered that room. Right as you walked in, you could feel the energy was so off. And it was heavy, and you looked down, and there they were, dark bloodstains on the floor. And not small ones either. They were big and spread out and all over. I remember just standing there staring at it, feeling sick, and I told my fiance, I was like, we need to leave right now. So we left the room and we started to go back downstairs as fast as we could. Trying not to look around too much, trying not to think about what would have happened in that room if we stayed there too long. We made it outside of the hotel into the courtyard where we were in between both wings of the hotel. That's when we heard it, a woman screaming, not far away, not echoing, right there. It was loud, it was sharp, it was out of pure panic. It did not sound distant, it was very close, like too close. We freaked out and we started to run away. And I'm talking full-on sprint back to the car. And we didn't look back, we just kept driving. But it did not leave my mind after that. I could not let it go. It turned into almost an obsession, and I found out that the place was called the Cleveland Country Club. It was built in the 1920s, and it used to be a high-end destination for old Hollywood stars. There wasn't much information about it back then, and there was nothing that would explain why we heard that in that room. All I know is it burnt down in 2001 due to arson. People believe that it is extremely haunted, and people go to visit there for fun, just to find things and hear things. Nobody ever gave a clear story about a woman being unalived there, mostly just rumors, but no records, no names, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard, because those stains were real, and that scream was not something that felt like it was from the past. It felt like it was literally in that moment. So if it used to be a popular place for Hollywood stars to go to, I wouldn't put anything past it.
I'm at the gas station right now, so I'm going to share a little quick story before I head home because I can't talk about my ghost stories at home. And I'm going to make it a little quick because the gas station energy today is wild. Some guy came flying in, scraping up the whole side of his car and his wheel, and he just kept scraping and scraping. He gave no fucks. So let's get into it so I can get home. I want to get home. There is something I completely forgot about the Kinigasa neighborhood that I was living in, because if you remember, I lived in Mitsura in the haunted house, and then we moved to a neighborhood called Kinigasa. And in Kinigasa, our house was not haunted, but we had that lady's house on the street that was haunted, and my sister and I had to pass by it every single day. Now, something that I had forgot. I don't know why I forgot about this. Maybe I probably repressed a lot, honestly. Shit's just coming up the more I talk about it. But after my neighbor had told me that that lady had unsubscribed from life, My sister and I still had to pass by that house every single day for school. There was no getting around it. Hang on. Ooh. That was a close call. Sorry. I'm in a crazy spot right now. And I remember every once in a while when my sister and I would pass by that house, yes, it was fucking creepy looking. It always will be. It probably still is. But there would be this horrendous fucking smell. Really, really bad smell coming from that house. And it would smell rotten. Like rotten eggs, just putrid, awful. And it wasn't every single day. It wasn't every single time. But once in a while, we'd pass by that house and there'd be like this, you'd be, what? You know what I mean? Weird. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's like old plumbing or sewage or something. But it had the smell of like, but it was an empty house. Like, it wasn't like she was still in there. It just smelled like it. So that was fucking weird. I remember that. And then before I left Japan, because I left Japan when I was 16, I remember a few days before my flight out, outside we had like a little mailbox. And I remember going outside to take the trash out for my mom, because Japanese trash days are wild. You have like combustibles, plastics, cans, like there's different types of trash days for different types of trash. And I remember taking the trash out for my mom, and as I'm walking back to the house, I noticed on top of our little mailbox was that fucking flashlight. Right? That flashlight that I stole from my stepdad that I dropped when I was leaving the house and I never went back for it. It was on top of the fucking mailbox. Now, how did it get there? Maybe somebody placed it. Maybe. That feels like a long shot though, you guys, because how would they have known? You know what I mean? It was on top of the mailbox, and I remember seeing it and my heart dropped. Like, I didn't feel well. I was like, oh shit. And this lady's house was like surrounded by like foliage growing and trees and stuff, and we were really careful when we snuck into that place. Like, I don't think anybody saw us, and why would it have been returned way later on, right? Like, and it was just placed right on top of the mailbox, and I left it there. I never said, hey, here's your flashlight. I was like, he'll find it when he needs it. I'm not fucking touching it. And it stayed there, and it's no longer my business. But that was a weird thing. That was weird, you guys.
Get ready with me while I tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I didn't believe in evil spirits until I stayed in a house that my entire family was too scared to talk about. This all happened back in 2011. I had just gone through a breakup, 4 years with my girlfriend. Suddenly, I had nowhere to go. So, with no real options left, I moved into my grandma's house. Now, that house has a reputation. Growing up, everyone in my family had a story about it. Strange noises, things moving, that feeling of being watched when you were completely alone. Oh no. Is it just me, or like the fact that it's grandma's house just makes it so much worse? Okay, you could have a haunted house, but if it's grandma's haunted house, I don't want anything to do with it. But the one story that always stuck with me was about my uncle. When he was younger, he had messed around with a Ouija board. Somebody, please, I need somebody to start taking account, okay, of how many times we are going to have to go through a Ouija board story and how many times I'm going to have to tell y'all to quit messing with that stuff. He had messed around with the Ouija board in one of the bedrooms. At first, it was just a game until it wasn't. According to him, things got intense. Things got scary. And instead of properly ending the session, closing whatever it was that he had opened, he panicked and threw the board away. Just like that. No goodbye, no closing, nothing. Genuinely, okay, what do? Do Do you buy another board, open something else, and then close that in hopes that it closes everything? Like, what do you do? After that, the activity in the house got way worse. So moving in, yeah, I didn't feel great about it, but I also didn't have a choice. The first few days were quiet, uneasy, but quiet. Kind of silence where you're constantly waiting for something to happen. But nothing ever did until one night. It was around 11 p.m. when I got home. My grandma had already gone to bed, so I kept the lights low and went straight into my room. I figured I would distract myself, so I called a friend. We were just talking, normal conversation, nothing serious, when suddenly I heard it. 2 voices right outside my bedroom door. 2. I froze mid-sentence. At first, I thought maybe the TV was on or my grandma had woken up, but no. These voices were different. They were low, overlapping, like 2 people trying to talk at the same time. I couldn't make out a single word. And it almost sounded like they were arguing or whispering over each other right outside my door. So I told my friend to hold on. Oh, we're about to go investigate. We're about to go investigate. Oh, I just listened. And then the voices stopped completely. I picked my phone back up and I whispered, I think someone's in the house. My heart was already racing at this point, so I hung up and got out of bed. I walked slowly toward the door. Every step that I took felt heavier than the last, and I stood there for a second, hand hovering over the handle, listening for anything. But I heard nothing, and then a thought hit me. My grandma. She was asleep at the end of the hall, and if someone really was in the house, she wouldn't even know. That's when my fear turned into panic, and I opened the door quickly and stepped into the hallway. Dark. Still. I walked straight to her room and pushed the door open. She was asleep, completely undisturbed and completely unaware of what I was experiencing. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, making sure that she was okay. And then I checked everything. Every room, every window, every door, locked, closed, exactly how it should be. No signs of anyone, no sounds, nothing. Oh my God. I even went outside thinking maybe it was a neighbor, someone talking loudly nearby. But when I stepped onto the porch, it was dead silent. No voices, no movement, not even cars. It was just me. And I remember standing there thinking, then what was it I heard? Eventually, I was able to convince myself that it was nothing, just my imagination or stress or the breakup, and I went back inside and somehow managed to fall asleep. The next morning, my friend called me. Hey, what happened last night? Are you okay? I told them that everything was fine, that I probably had just overreacted. That was an underreaction, in my opinion. I would have woken Grandma up, put her in the car, and gone somewhere else for the night, okay? As we were talking, I started walking around the house, just pacing, not really thinking about where I was going, and without realizing it, I walked into that room, the one my uncle used the Ouija board in. The second I stepped inside, my friend went quiet. Then they asked, "Is your grandma snoring?" I frowned. No, she's awake, she's watching TV. And there was a pause. That's when they said, "I hear something." What do you mean? Another pause. It sounds like growling. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked straight out of the room. The second I stepped into the hallway, my friend said, "Oh, it stopped." And that was it. Like whatever it had been was waiting in that room, and it didn't want me going in there. I didn't go back into that room, and I didn't stay in that house much longer. I moved out a couple weeks later. I didn't wait for something worse to happen because deep down, I already knew that the house wasn't just haunted. There was something in it. Something that didn't want to be heard unless you were close enough. And the scariest part is everyone in my family who's ever lived there has experienced something. Something that they can't explain, and none of us like to talk about it for very long.
These were her final moments captured on camera before this monster took everything from her. Athena Strand, a 7-year-old girl living in Paradise, Texas, was outside playing on her parents' driveway when she sees a FedEx driver stop in front of her house, and he's carrying this big brown box towards her front door. And as she's watching him go up the driveway, she notices that he keeps looking at her. And it wasn't a friendly, like, oh, look at her playing kind of stare. It was a predatory, calculating kind of gaze that didn't see a child at all. Rather than dropping the package off at the front door like usual, he quickly sets it down next to her parents' abandoned trailer to the side of the property, and then he started walking towards her. Athena sees the man getting closer and closer and closer to her, and within seconds, she feels these big, rough hands squeeze her body, lift her into the air, while 6 words get whispered into her ears: "Don't scream or I'll hurt you." And with no time to process what was happening, let alone understand what he was saying, Athena's reality went from playing on her driveway to being slammed into the back of a FedEx truck, the side of her home disappearing with a man that she didn't know. This man was 31-year-old Tanner Horner, someone with no prior criminal record, just a very, very evil plan. As Tanner climbed into the driver's seat and put the truck in gear, he looked back at that little girl who's terrified and confused, and gave her a look as cold and evil as the monsters in her storybook. Tanner pulled off the main road and circled the back roads, looking for a perfect quiet spot to park. And when he found it, he cut the engine, with only the sounds being Athena's nervous breathing in the back. And as Tanner sat in the driver's seat, heart beating with adrenaline, he immediately realized he has a problem. You see, Tanner didn't really have like a fully laid out plan when he kidnapped Athena. He kind of just saw her and decided, yeah, I'm gonna kidnap her. And so this led to something that he didn't really calculate for. Athena has already seen his face. She knows exactly what he looks like. And he knew that if he let her go after all of this, then she would just describe to her parents, or worse, the cops, what he looked like. And as he sat there, completely losing his mind, trying to figure out what the hell he's gonna do, Athena said something that cut his train of thought off in the worst way possible. "I'm gonna tell my daddy what you did to me." And that was it. That was all the confirmation he needed to make the decision he was already thinking about. I'm not gonna walk you through the horrible graphics because Athena deserves every protection that we can still give her, but I will tell you that it was something a 7-year-old should never even think the world is capable of. He violently attacked her in the back of that truck to the point where his DNA was found on body parts that no 7-year-old should ever have. And then once he felt satisfied with what he's done, which that statement alone is just absolutely disgusting to say, he tried breaking her neck. But when he realized that didn't work, it just left her scream crying instead, he proceeded to wrap his hands around her neck and squeeze. Athena fought for her life in the back of that FedEx truck for almost a whole hour. And at just 7 years old, she lost that fight to this disgusting, vile, evil waste of space. Tanner then drove 10 miles to the Trinity River and tossed her exposed body into the river like it was nothing. Then while he was driving, he just threw her clothes out of the window along the state highway and finished his route before going home for the night. Meanwhile, Athena's parents were screaming her name out into the dark all night, desperately trying to find out where the hell was their daughter. They immediately filed her as missing, getting the police involved as quick as possible, and once an investigation started, they found out that the package delivered to their house the day before perfectly matched the exact minute Athena disappeared. So all they needed to do was figure out who delivered it, and once Tanner's name got brought up, they pulled his truck footage, and there she was, right there in the back of his truck. When he got arrested and interviewed, he was honestly just spewing lie after lie after lie. But eventually, after wasting hours of time, he broke down and blamed his sinister shadow self, or alter ego named Zero, for the murder. That Zero was the one who did it. I'm just gonna let you guys sit with that dumbass excuse, okay? On April 7, 2026, he pleaded guilty, and as of right now, a jury is deciding between whether he deserves life without parole or death. If you had a seat with the jury, what would you choose? Inside the box Tanner was delivering that day was a set of 6 You Can Be Anything Barbie dolls. Her stepmom bought them for Athena as a Christmas present that was happening just 3 weeks later, and now she will never get the chance to break it open and play with them. That is all that I have for today. Please be safe out there. I love you guys. Group up.
I've told my family that a while ago, and I keep reminding them exactly the same thing. When I pass away, do not bury me. I don't want no funeral. As soon as that, they know that, I'm gone from this body, burn it. Do not bury it. I don't want to be attached to Mother Nature. I don't want to be part of this dirt. I don't want to be stuck here physically. That physical body, whatever it is, get rid of it completely. Reason why that I've actually made that decision for myself now is because no matter how you put it and how you twist it around, who you ask, what kind of research that you make from the past and now, you will never understand, you will never have this answer for this question right here I'm about to ask. Why are we not building more cemeteries? Why is that like we keep building more buildings, more landscape, more roads, more everything, but you will never hear anyone investing in building some cemeteries? Because guess what? People lose their lives every day. And I don't mean about 2, 3 and single digits of numbers of people. I'm talking about the mass. By the mass. That like we literally, outperforming, the living as much as we dying on a regular basis. But yet, there is no new cemeteries getting built. It's the same ones that as we known for as long as we've been here. Like as us, as this generation, we've never seen any constructions going on. And then once you've seen the panels or you ask the construction workers, hey, what are you building? Oh, we're building a new cemetery for new bodies. Never. So that raises the question. All these like unalive bodies, like from like decades and decades ago, and people actually, being alive right now, where do they go? Where? And the other question is something I've been like literally keeping my eye on to. I've been noticing that when I go to like a new place, somewhere new, like some other town or some, I don't know, other city that I haven't been to for a while or I've never been to, I always end up seeing at least a few people that looks so familiar that like sometimes I think it's a friend of mine that I've known from a while ago, and then I just happen to run into them, and then they are not the same person at all. They are complete different people, but they look exactly the same familiar faces that you've seen someplace before. Like I've had many, like I've heard many stories from other people saying that like my uncle passed, but then I went to this country and I've seen him, but he doesn't recognize me. Or my aunt, I've seen my aunt from another country or another city, but she's passed like 15, 20 years ago. And it just like, it's this questions that I've been asking for a while now. Like, could it possibly be that we recycling bodies from the cemeteries? Which is why there's always places for new ones. Could that be a possibility? And then when you look at like, oh man, like certain regulations, with cemeteries, like once it's sealed, you can't just legally go undig the body. But yet there's always space. There's always space for a new person. I know that to some way and somehow along the way, like these cemeteries have run out of space, should have run out of space by now, but they haven't. So this is something I'm very strong on. Once I'm gone, I do not want to get buried. Just get me cremated. Get rid of that physical self of mine. Turn it into ash and dump it somewhere. I don't care. Forget about this. Because I don't want to be recycled. I want to move forward. I don't know what's happening with cemetery, but it seemed a little flawed to me. A little bit.